Hey guys, so in this video, I seek to provide a fairly comprehensive overview of a fantastic toolset that is known as a Redux toolkit. So I've been spending about the past week playing around with it in my spare time, and I gotta say it will definitely speed up the process and also remove a lot of the boilerplate headache that comes with setting up a Redux application. So if you are a Redux user, this is something you should definitely check out and perhaps even use in your future projects. So before we take a deep dive into this, let's take a quick overview about what this toolkit's all about. I'm on the official website of it here, and the tagline is that it is the official opinionated batteries included toolset for efficient Redux development. Let's break this down a bit. So first of all, it's official, meaning it's been created by the Redux team. It's been created by the maintainers of the Redux library right now. And that may be a bit surprising to some of you, as it's still pretty unknown at this time, but that's only because it's still pretty new at the time of this video's creation, with the first stable version coming out just last year in October. However, it will most definitely be picking up steam really quick, really soon, so it's probably a good idea to get accustomed to it before it gets even more mainstream. It's also opinionated, meaning it kind of guides you to set up your Redux application in a certain way. Redux was originally designed to be very unopinionated for the most part, such as giving you options to handle async requests, whether you wanted to use Dunks or Redux Saga, and so on. But this toolkit will kind of steer you to go in a certain direction. And although it's flexible enough so that it won't force you to adhere to its rules, it's probably the path that we should all follow unless we have some good reason not to. And I think this is a good thing for the most part for the Redux community. To have an official way of setting up a project. Not only that, it will probably make it easier for newcomers to come into learning about how Redux is all set up. The next thing is that it is quote unquote batteries included toolset. So this just means that it comes with some libraries that the Redux team recommends us to use. So you could kind of think of it like a Create React app for Redux. It gives you all these things included that you will probably use, so you don't need to install them and set them up separately. And finally, and this is probably the most important, it's very efficient. Very efficient as a matter of fact. I'm going to show you a hands-on comparison later in this video showing a Redux project set up the traditional way and also the Redux toolkit way. So you'll see that it is a lot simpler and a lot less code to set up using the toolkit. So before we continue on with this video, let me give a bit of a roadmap of what we'll be doing. The first thing is we'll see what's included with this toolkit and briefly go over why those packages were included in the first place. Then we will have a brief overview of some of the functions that this library comes with, because soon after that, we will be setting up a simple to-do app in two separate ways. The first time, we will set it up the traditional way, manually defining our action type constants, action creators, reducers, setting up our store, and so on. Then we'll set up the same project, except this time we'll be using the Redux toolkit. This will hopefully give us some hands-on work to learn and how to set up a Redux app using the toolkit way, and it will be a good comparison to show us why it's so efficient and useful to use. I'll also be giving you a starter template with all the CSS and functional components set up already, so that we can just focus on the Redux part of the application. After we see for ourselves just how useful it all is, we'll go back to the documentations to look at all the functionalities and details some more. This will hopefully solidify our knowledge a bit more, and we'll be a bit more prepared to go into some of the more specific details of this package. And after that, I will have a Q&A section where I'll try my best answering some of the more common questions that this toolkit has. These are some questions that, first of all, I personally encountered while messing with this library, and also some of the common questions I found on the web. So if you're coding along or watching this video and you have some questions along the way, hopefully I'll get to it and answer it in this section. So as you can probably already see from the length of this video, this will be a pretty comprehensive video on the Redux toolkit. But I think it'll be a good learning material for the community to have, especially because from my research, not much videos exist yet on the toolkit. By the way, I'll try to have some timestamps both on the description of this video and also a pinned comment in the comment section, so that it'll be a bit easier to navigate through this whole video if you wish to do so. Now, here are a few things I'm going to assume that you already have. First of all, this video will assume that you are comfortable with traditional Redux. While I will briefly explain why I'm setting up a certain thing a certain way, I won't go into the things such as what a reducer is, what action creators are, and so on. So if you're an absolute beginner of Redux watching this video, this may not be the best place to start. I may, however, in the near future, release a series on teaching Redux, and specifically the Redux Toolkit way for beginners. I don't think any video tutorials exist yet on teaching beginners Redux via this method, so it will be something new and interesting for the community. I also think it can be a lot easier for a beginner to learn Redux using the Redux Toolkit way instead of the typical way, as it gets rid of a lot of the boilerplate and as you can just focus on the core topics of Redux. The second thing, the second requirement is I will be using TypeScript when we do our code along. So if you have absolute zero experience using TypeScript, it may be a bit difficult to follow along later, but honestly, it shouldn't be too hard. I decided to write the code in TypeScript because if you're using Redux, you're probably already using TypeScript in the first place. And many people may be wondering how to use the toolkit with TypeScript. And finally, and this is not too big of a deal to be honest, but I will be using hooks in this project. Both hooks from the React library to manage our component state, as well as hooks from the React Redux library such as useDispatch and useSelector hook. Again, this way of creating a React library has been out for about a year now, so most of you guys are probably already used to it. Well, those are the requirements, so on with the video. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to look at all the packages that this Redux Toolkit comes with. So I'm on the official GitHub repo of Redux Toolkit. And remember what we said in the beginning, it says that it is a batteries included toolset for efficient Redux development. So it's kind of like Create React App where it has a couple packages that the maintainers of Redux thinks that we should be using. So it's opinionated, remember. And it has installed those packages for us to use. So it comes with this toolkit. So I'm on the GitHub. Let's go inside the, let's first check out the package.json file here. So what I'm interested in are the dependencies that is listed here. Okay, so let me zoom in this real quick. So as you can see, there are 6 packages that the Redux Toolkit comes with. And we're gonna go over all of these, but let's get the easy stuff out of the way. So first off, of course, it has the Redux library inside. What this means is if you install Redux Toolkit to your app, you don't need to separately install Redux because it comes included with it. However, notice that nowhere here do you see React Redux. So again, Redux Toolkit, you don't need to just use it with the React app. You could also use it with any other types of apps that's written in JavaScript, I believe. It's just that most people do use it with React app. So just like using the traditional Redux, you have to install React Redux separately to use this with your React project. So it comes with Redux. Another easy thing is it has the Redux DevTools extension by default. That is this little green thing. Mine's not on right now, but this Chrome DevTools, you could use this. And by the way, you don't even need to set it up. It sets it up for you automatically and turns it on by default. So if you wanted to turn it off or conditionally turn it off, there is a simple, like a Boolean that you could just check to turn it off. So it's very simple to use and you don't have to do this npm install Redux DevTools extension, all that stuff, and just put that in your store and all that stuff. So it makes it very simple to use. So not only that, and this may be controversial, but I don't really think it is. It comes with Redux Dunk to handle your async requests as default. And this is installed into our Redux application as default. And I say default because you could turn it off as well. So Redux Dunk is not the only middleware that could handle your async requests. As a matter of fact, Mark Erickson, in his blog, he's one of the maintainers of Redux, a very helpful guy, by the way. So he made a little blog post here. I'll put the links in the description below. And pretty much in this blog, he explains why he chose to use Redux Dunk as a default to handle the async logic. So if you're curious, you could read this. It's a fairly interesting read. And I agree with a lot of the points that he says. I personally also use Redux Dunk in my applications, both at work and at home. But these are his 3 bullet points. So he got into like a debate with someone else because I guess the other person liked using Redux Saga more than Redux Dunk. But Mark's reasoning for having Redux Dunk as the default is 1, they are the most widely used Redux async middleware, which is true. Number 2, they handle the most common case of I want to fetch some data. And also, we as in the Redux team, specifically recommend them as a default approach for async logic. So again, this does not mean that you can't use any other async middleware, because you surely can. You could turn off Redux Dunk, and you could use, for example, Redux Saga if you choose to, but as default, this package comes with Redux Dunk installed as default. Another tool that it comes with as default is Reselect. So hopefully you guys know and use Reselect before, but if not, that's fine. Reselect, what it pretty much does, by the way, we're not gonna go over actually using this when we start coding, but what it does is it memoizes your selectors. Whenever you grab things from your store, you can memoize it so that it doesn't re-render your components needlessly. So, and this is where it gets useful. So this library comes with one function, I believe, that's in Reselect called create selector. I personally use that a lot. As a matter of fact, I plan on making a video on how to use Reselect in your Redux React applications, and not only Reselect, but also re-reselect, and what the difference between those two are. So this is a pretty useful tool to have, and I definitely use this too, and you should be doing too. So we have 2 more packages to talk about, that is Immer and Redux Immutable State Environment. Let's take care of this one first. So this is a middleware. Let me go to his npm website. It's over here. And let me read it for us real quick. It says Redux middleware that spits an error on you when you try to mutate your state either inside a dispatch or between dispatches for development use only. So pretty much it's just like a helper middleware, so that in case we try to mutate our state directly, that's not allowed in reducers. So whenever we try to do that, it will give us an error. So this is kind of helping us avoid the common pitfalls that a lot of people make when creating a Redux application. However, it says here, don't use this in production because this may slow down your project. It says here, it involves a lot of objects copying and will degrade your app's performance. So this is purely for development use only. Now, however, I was going through the blogs, and this is Mark Erickson again, a very helpful guy. And one thing that he did say is something that he's going to do in the future, the near future. It says, fork Redux Immutable State Environment into RTK, Redux Toolkit, and ensure that it's actually getting stripped out of the production bundles, because right now it isn't. So right now, technically, it's a slight problem that we have the Redux Immutable State Environment within the actual production build if we were to use the Redux Toolkit, but I'm sure he'll fix it soon enough. And maybe even by the time that you're watching this video, it has been fixed. So I wouldn't worry too much about this right now. But this is definitely a very helpful middleware for us to have, because we should not be mutating our state within our reducers. But our final package that this comes with is called Immer. Now, this is a very interesting package that actually allows us to quote unquote mutate the state within our reducers. So it's kind of funny. This, where is it? This Redux Immutable State Environment middleware forbids us from mutating our state, but Immer will actually allow us to mutate the state, and magically in the backend, it will actually put immutable state logic for us. So let's go and talk about this a little bit more in detail right now. I'm on the official Redux documentation. So again, this is not Redux Toolkit's documentation website. This is the original Redux documentation website. And this page right here, it explains to us the immutable update pattern. So this is one of the core principles of Redux, is that we can't directly update our store. We can't directly mutate our store. We gotta dispatch actions to update our store. That is one of the principles of Redux. So we gotta do the way that we get around not mutating our state is we gotta do these crazy immutable update patterns. Let me just try to give you guys an example. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this. Let me open up my terminal. Just pretend that we are in our reducer and we're trying to update the state, right? And our state is in the state variable. Let's just pretend that's the case. Let's say that our state was an array. Then if we want to like add a new element to an array, let's say it was a array of numbers, for example, right? We can't do like state.push because then we are directly mutating our state, because our push is a mutating function. We can't do this. So the only way we could have updated our state immutably was within our reducer, we return the new state. So we spread our old state, getting all the elements from our old state, and we just add the new element that we want to add. So we had to do all of these loop arounds. This is a pretty easy example, but there are nightmare cases. And this page kind of shows you all the crazy stuff you have to do. Look at all these spread operators going on here. And this page pretty much gives you all the hints, all the tips that we should do for these complicated update logic. However, this Redux toolkit comes with Immer. So let me read this real quick for us, just so that you guys know what Immer is all about. Immer, German for always, is a tiny package that allows you to work with immutable state in a more convenient way. It is based on the copy on write mechanism. The basic idea is that you will apply all your changes to a temporary draft state, which is a proxy of the current state. Once all your mutations are completed, Immer will provide the next state based on the mutations of the draft state. This means that you can interact with your data by simply modifying it while keeping all the benefits of immutable data. So this is the key. So if this kind of went over your head, don't worry about it. What this pretty much means is we can, within our reducers, we can directly, quote unquote, update or mutate the state. For example, by doing state.push or modifying one of the properties in an object. We could do that, not because that's allowed, because that isn't allowed in a reducer. But what Immer will do for us is it will see whenever we try to update the state directly, it will convert that logic into an immutable update logic for us automatically. So practically what this means for us is within our reducers, we could quote unquote mutate the state directly, and Immer will do all the magic for us and convert that to a immutable state logic. So this is a very powerful tool, and it will make writing or updating our state patterns much easier and much more legible too. Our code may look a lot more legible because of this Immer, and it will pretty much do the same thing as before. Now, there are a couple pitfalls, and I will cover them later, but right now it may not be the best time to explain to you guys the pitfalls of this. And it's not serious pitfalls, it's easily avoidable, but we'll go over them after we do a hands-on to-do example later in this video. This brings up a kind of interesting point. So Immer, quote unquote, allows us, if you will, to update the state directly, mutate the state, but the middleware Redux immutable state invariant don't allow us to mutate the state. So what's kind of going on here? Why did the maintainers of Redux decide to have both of these libraries? I'm not entirely sure, but what I think is happening is whenever so Immer is in the reducers, the two reducer functions that this library comes with, which we'll go over real soon. So whenever you try to update the state directly within the reducers provided by those functions, Immer will do its magic for us. But I think whenever you try to update the state outside of those reducers, or maybe you try to create your own reducer for some reason, then this Redux immutable state environment middleware will kick in and give us an error. So I think that's what's going on. But either way, these are meant to help us and meant to make our code faster for us to write, and much more legible for us to read. So I think this is a good thing for Redux Toolkit, especially for beginners. So that was our overview of all the dependencies that this Redux Toolkit comes with. Now let's go over the functions that this toolkit comes with that we're gonna be using. All right, so I'm on the official Redux Toolkit website. Links will be in the description below. But what I want to do before we start coding is I want us to check the API real quick to see what's included with this toolkit. So we checked the dependencies, the libraries that this comes with. Now let's look at the interesting functions that this comes with. So these, as you see here, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 plus some other exports, minor exports that's also included here. We're gonna go over these in more detail later after we have coded a small to-do app. But before we do the to-do app, I just want to go through these real quick so that you guys kind of know what's going to happen, what's going on. So again, I'm going to assume that you guys are accustomed to how to set up a Redux application. Now, the two most interesting function of interest here is not this create reducer, this create action, but it's actually the create slice and also the configure store. But let's go over the less interesting ones first. Let's go over the create reducer first. All right, so if you remember from setting up your reducers and your Redux application before Redux Toolkit, reducers were just functions that you would create using native JavaScript. So you didn't use a special function that the Redux came with. Now you use something special that Redux came with to combine your reducers by using the combine reducers function. But to create your individual reducers, you would just make a standard function like this. A function that takes in two parameters, your state, which must always be initialized, as you can see from this equals 0 here, and an action that it receives. So what it does is it receives this action and gives you the updated state based upon the action, typically written using a switch and a case statement like you see here. So what this create reducer does, again, let me just stress this again. Most of the time, 99% of the time, you don't need to use this create reducer function and you don't need to use this create action function that it comes with. It may seem like they're useful, especially if you're coming from a traditional Redux background. However, there's this other function called create slice that almost will take care of every scenario so that you don't have to use this create reducer and you don't have to use this create action. We'll go over to this juicy one in a bit, but let's go over the create reducer real quick. So pretty much, instead of you building this from scratch, it allows you to build, It allows you to build an action very quickly. I kind of lost my train of thought. Okay, so I'm on the create reducer, right? So again, it gets a state which you must initialize. You pass in an action and it gives you the updated state, return, right? So one thing good about this is because this library has Immer included with it, if you chose to use this create reducer function to create your reducers, you could quote unquote mutate your state directly, and Immer will do its magic backend and give you an immutable state update. So if you look here, add to do, we have an add to do type. What is going on here? We get the payload that is a to do, and we just push it to our state. This would typically not be allowed in a standard Redux application, but because this has Immer plugged in, we could quote unquote mutate the state directly like this, and Immer will do its magic and allow us to update the state correctly. So this is create reducer. Again, we're not gonna be really using this because this create slice kind of makes this you don't have to use these two. But let's go over to create action real quick. So what a action creator typically is in a Redux application is, again, it's just a traditional JavaScript function that gets a parameter. It has a bunch of parameters. You could define how many parameters you want in your action creators, and it just returns an action. Now, what an action is an object with a type that tells you what type it is. In this case, they called it counter/increment. This is also interesting, by the way, but I'll go over this in a little bit. But also the action also has an optional payload, and this payload could be anything you want, right? And these in turn get passed to your reducers. But let me go over this. So Redux Toolkit kind of changes how you define your types. Before, if you had like a counter and an increment action, typically you would call it, let me get my terminal open if I can, not my sound. I'm not used to this Apple touch bar keyboard, so sorry about that. All right, so let me zoom in for us real quick. Get rid of all this stuff that's going on here. Not sure what's going on. But before, typically we would type our constants like so. Maybe, what is this? Increment a counter. Increment counter is equal to increment counter. So this is typically what our action type would be before, like the typical way. But Redux Toolkit, because of the way that it's set up, they have chose to go this route where we have the name of the slice of the state in the first and the name of the action for that state as a second verb. So I think this is I'm definitely gonna be implementing this type of thing in my future projects, and I think you will like it too. So initially I was very skeptical of the way that this is written, just because I'm used to the other capitalized constants. I'll explain you and I'll show you guys during our actual code along why this is so useful and so handy for us to use. So again, this create action is a function that the Redux Toolkit comes with that allows us to create our actions, our action creators. But again, we're not gonna be using this that much because the important one is this create slice. So what is this create slice? Let's read about what this documentation says that it is. It says it's a function that accepts an initial state, an object full of reducers functions, and a quote-unquote slice name, and automatically generates action creators and action types that correspond to the reducer and state. So this is an extremely powerful function that will reduce our boilerplate tremendously in our Redux application. So again, 99% of the time, I think you don't need to use this create reducer and this separate create action function. You could just combine those two with this powerful create slice function. And we're gonna be using this function in our Redux to-do example. But this pretty much accepts an object, and it first accepts reducers. Let me see an example if they have one down here. Yeah, so here it is. All right, so the first thing you accept is a name. So this is a name of the slice of the state that you're dealing with. In our case, it's called the counter. So this is something maybe like you don't usually name your reducers, your slice in the typical Redux application. I guess you would name your variables, but you don't typically name, like you don't have a key value pair called name. So this is something kind of new, but it's very important. It's very handy, especially when they create us the action types. That's where this comes to play. So it's very useful, and we must it's a requirement to give it an initial state. So before, in the old way of doing this, is the old way of creating reducers, you give your initial state to your state using this equal sign here, as you see here, equals 0. So many times, because this is a traditional JavaScript function, many people will forget to do this, and then their application would bug out. But because that is a common mistake, they now enforce us to give it an initial state. So this will prevent a lot of amateur mistakes. Not just amateur, but I do it too all the time. I forget it many times. So this is very definitely handy. Now, reducers, instead of using our switch case and all that switch case statements, if this, if that, we just pass it a key value pairs where the keys corresponds to part of the action name, the action type name, and then the value will be our reducer. Like here, we're getting a state, we're incrementing it by 1, and then here we're decrementing it by 1, and so on. There's also special ways to set it up. We'll see this in our example. Extra reducers, we don't have to worry about it, although I will show you guys using this later. And let's see what else they have. So they have another slice here. So here they had a slice of the counter state, and now here they have a slice of the user state. They give it an initial state here again, have one reducer associated with the user, and they call this combined reducer. So again, if you're used to Redux, you probably know about this combined reducers. It's the same function. We just combine the different reducers, giving them names, right? And now this is where it gets very interesting. We define the reducers here, right? The slice, create slice. Now this will automatically give us the action types and the action creators. So notice what we call this create slice here. We defined it to a variable called const counter, and we call this create slice here to this variable user, const user. So we have the counter variable and the user variable. Now if you go down this line here, look at what this has. This counter that we have defined above has a property called action, and this key in turn has all of our action creators that it automatically generates for us. So we're calling the increment here that is associated with the increment reducer here. We have the multiply. We didn't really go over that. We also have the decrement. And for the users, we had the set username. So it has automatically created us these action creators so that we don't have to have a separate file that defines all the action creators. And not only that, it has automatically defined us the action types. So how, remember if you go back to here, how the interesting way that they have defined their action, this is the name of your slice and this is the name of your reducer. So it just combines it and gives you this automatically. So that's definitely very useful, and it will speed up your code a lot. You will write it in half the lines of code almost, as you will see pretty soon when we go to code. However, let's just finish going over some of these functions that it comes with. Create selector. So this is from the reselect library. We're not going to be covering this here. I will make a video in the future. If I've already made a video about it, I'll put it in the links description below. But this is a handy way of memoizing your, optimizing your application so that it will speed it up so that you don't have unnecessary re-renders. So don't worry too much about this. We have a little bit of other exports. Do you remember one of the library that this came with is the serializable state invariant middleware? So this is a function that allows you to customize that, how that works. We won't spend too much time on that. And we have, this is part of Immer. We don't have to worry about that too much right now. Combined reducers is pretty much the same as the Redux is combined reducers, where we combine our different reducers into one. Compose also is the same from the Redux library that also has this compose. Bind action creator. So this pretty much is kind of like the map dispatch props, where we automatically wrap our action creators with dispatch so that it makes it handy for us, easy to use. Not too important. Create store is the Redux's version of create store. It says you should not need to use this directly because we have the other interesting function here called the configure store. And we have apply middleware. So you'll probably use this too. He says also here, you should not use this directly. So let's look at the configure store. All right, so this is a friendly abstraction over the standard Redux create store function that adds good defaults to the store setup for a better development experience. So this will, let's see, the things that it takes. So this is pretty much like our create store from our Redux, typical Redux application. Reducer is where we put our reducers. If you have more than one reducer, you use the combined reducers and just put it here. You could optionally define middleware, additional middleware that you want this your application to have. Now keep in mind that this Redux toolkit comes with default middleware such as the invariant state or whatever, the Immer. Oh no, Immer is not really a middleware, I guess, or maybe it is. It also comes with Redux Dunk as default, and also it has the Redux DevTools applied to your application by default. Now, if you want to turn off your DevTools, you could just, this also takes the DevTools Boolean optionally, and you could just put maybe like true here to turn it off, or have a conditional statement here to turn it off. Preloaded state is pretty much the same thing as a store. It gives you a preloaded state pretty much. Enhancers is just another way of adding middlewares, I believe. So this is very useful. Now, remember I told you that in the beginning that Redux Toolkit comes with a specific set of middlewares that's already configured. If you don't want to use those default middlewares for whatever reason, or you want to add additional middlewares, so you would use this middleware key value pair here. And if you want to add additional middlewares to your application, in your configure store, in your middleware, let's see, you would just spread the get default middleware. This will give you all the default middleware that automatically comes with, and you could add additional middleware to your application. So again, that might have been kind of confusing, but we're going to be dealing with this in our demo, so don't worry too much about it. But that's pretty much the Redux toolkit. So now that we had a fairly brief overview, let's go into our application. But before that, let's figure out how we can use this Redux toolkit. Okay, so right now there's two ways to add Redux toolkit to a project, specifically to a React project. I'm going to be focused on React right now. So the two ways are either you install it directly or you use something else. So the first way is just to install it. So npm install at redux.js/toolkit. I think that's it. So again, you could add this to a new project or add it to an existing project. Now keep in mind that this comes with all the packages that we discussed, including Redux. So if you're installing this to an existing application that already uses Redux, you could, after you install this, you could uninstall Redux because that's redundant. This already comes with Redux. However, if you're working on a React project, you have to also install React-Redux because this one, just like Redux, it's not necessarily aimed just for a React project. So if you're using this with a React project, then you also have to install React Redux. Now, this is not the only way to get started. You could actually, there is a starter kit, there's a template for Create React App that automatically installs all the things that Create React App comes with, plus the Redux toolkit. And it even gives you an example to get started. So the way that you start that is npx create react app, the name of your file or whatever, and then hyphen template Redux. So this will install everything in create react app plus all the Redux toolkit stuff and an example for you to use. Now let me just clear this real quick. This file right here, this directory that I'm on right now, actually I ran that right before I started recording this video. So it comes with all the standard stuff that Create React App comes with, but it looks a little different. Let me get this started real quick. And as that load, let me just show you guys. We have this file called, let's see. We have this folder called features. So this has a counter example that we're gonna see very soon. It has the functional component. I don't know if you guys can see that. Oh, my IDE is screwing up right now. But pretty much ignore all these lines. It has a functional component that it comes with the counter example. And also it uses the create slice function that we discussed briefly before. So it already has made us our store. And we could just study this and look at it and also check out this is what the starting page looks like. So it looks a little different than your typical Create React App application, but it also has this counter example that it comes with, so you can see how that works. You can see that the Redux toolkit is also lit up, so that's connected by default. So this is a pretty handy and a useful way to get started with your Redux application. However, let's go on and compare now the creating a Redux application using the traditional way and also the Redux toolkit way. Now to get started, I will give you guys a GitHub link to give you a start code. All right, guys, so I have my code on the left side and I have my GitHub page with this code, the starting code on the right side. So the link to this GitHub page is in the description below. Please, I highly encourage you guys to check out this page and either clone or fork the starting code here. Now, let me just explain how I made this starting code just to show you guys that there's no magic going on. So first of all, I created this project. It kind of looks like this picture. This is how it looks like, and we will see that very soon. So I just did an npx create react app, and I also used a Typescript template. So this project will be in Typescript. And because I personally like Prettier, I also installed Prettier and added a eslint.json file to link eslint and Prettier together. Not a big deal, that's optional. And if you don't use that, don't worry about it. I also installed for us the UUID because whenever we make new to-do lists like here, learn Redux Toolkit or learn Redux or whatever, we are going to give them a unique ID. And the way that we're going to give them a unique ID is going to be using this UUID. I'm sure that most of you guys are already familiar with using this. It just generates a random unique ID. And then I also removed the starting code that the Create React App starts with and made pretty much this template right here. Now, this is what it looks like. I already started my server by doing npm start. So guys, please, again, if you haven't already, please clone the project, the starting code, and follow along with me. Now, I don't have Redux installed anywhere right now. We're going to be doing that together because I just want to go through the process with you guys of the typical process, the boilerplate and all that stuff that we have to go through to create a project using the traditional Redux way. And then afterwards, seeing how we can do that with the new Redux Toolkit, the RTK method. Okay, so once you start your server and it's running, this is what you should see. Now it may look like we have some state going on. So here is our counter up here. I don't know if you guys can see that. So let me zoom in for us real quick. Here's the counter. Here is the form to add a new to-do. And it seems like we already have 3 to-dos and they appear to be clickable, although nothing really happens when we click on them. And we got these edit and all that stuff here too, but they don't really do anything. So again, I don't have Redux or React Redux or Redux Toolkit or whatever installed right now. We're going to be going through those together. So what I did, let's go into our source file, go into our app folder, and let's just have a brief overview of this app file right now. So in the beginning, after I install, import all the stuff that we need for this project, I just made a array of the to-dos that we have. So these to-dos that you see here are hard-coded in to my code base right now. Later, of course, we're going to be replacing this with the actual Redux store and grabbing the to-dos from there. But for now, we're just going to be using this. I also have another quote-unquote state called the selected to-do ID. And I'm just grabbing, for whatever reason, the first index to-do. So if you look here, notice that the second one is bolded out. And that's what you see here. That's because that's the selected to-do. I just hard-coded that in. So again, we can't really select anything else right now. And also this edited count that you see here, which is 0, is also hard-coded in. Now within our functional component, this is a functional component, I'm using hooks. We have 2 state variables representing the inputs that we have. One of the input is creating a new to-do, which I'm calling the new to-do input. The other one is whenever you edit the input, this is your second input called the edit to-do input. And also I have a Boolean state variable here that is telling the component whether we are currently in the edit mode or not. So what I mean by that is right now, the way that this page stands, we are not in the edit mode. But once I click edit here, now we are in the edit mode. So that's the conditional logic. I use this Boolean to display conditionally whatever that you see here. Okay, so I also use the useRef. By the way, I'm explaining all of these guys to you so that in case you're confused about some of these things, I just want you guys to be on the same page as me. This useRef is the ref for the edit input, this input specifically. And the only reason why I have that here, this useRef, is so that once you click this edit, your cursor automatically goes inside to this field, this input field right here. So that's the only purpose of this useRef. So if you're scared of this, don't worry about it. Here, const selected to do, what I do is if we have a selected to do state, which right now we do because we hard-coded that in up here in line 30, then we go through our to-dos array and we find that to-do and we assign that to this variable here. Otherwise, we assign this as null. And I have various event handlers down here, which are pretty much empty. They don't really do anything right now. We have the handle new input change, handle edit input change, handle create new to do, select to do, edit, blah, 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 all that stuff. And this use effect, again, the only reason why I have this is to put the focus on the cursor when we go into the edit mode onto the input. That's the only purpose of this use effect. Don't be scared by it. And then we have more event handlers, handle update, handle cancel update. This is when you click cancel. When you're in the edit mode and you just want to cancel that, you're like, never mind, I don't want to edit it. That's what this is for. And then handle toggle for whether it's complete or not, and handle delete. And this is what our JSX looks like. So that's it about this component. Again, notice we don't have any Redux stuff going on right now. Now let me show you guys the second file of interest, and that is this type.d.ts. This is a type file for Typescript. And it just pretty much gives us the type of our to-do, first of all. To-do is an object with 3 properties, ID, which is a string, which we will generate by the UUID package. Description is just a name of the to-do, and is complete is a Boolean, whether it's true or false, depending on whether it's complete or not. And if it is complete, then we will see the strike through, like you see here. We also have the interface, a type of our state. Remember from the beginning, we're going to have 3 slices of our state. Our state will be divided into 3 slices. That is the to-dos, which is an array of our to-dos. Selected to-do, whichever to-do that we have selected that is showing here. Let me just do it like that. That's probably better. So whatever you see here, that is the selected to-do, and this will either be null or the ID of our to-do. And then we also have this random counter that keeps track of anytime we edit, create, or delete a to-do, anytime we manipulate a to-do in any way, we just increment this counter. And again, that's a little bit pointless, I admit, but I just had this state within my application because I want to show you guys a new feature that this Redux toolkit comes with. And I want to make use out of that. So this is the best example I came up with. And I think you guys will get the point. So I'm assuming that you guys have downloaded this file. So look through the code one more time, try messing with it just to get yourself comfortable with it. And if you have done that so far, come back to this video. And now we will continue creating the Redux store, Redux reducer, action creator, and all that stuff the traditional way. And I'm not gonna set this up quote unquote the right way. I'm just gonna put everything in one file because one, this application is not that big, and two, I don't wanna make this this video too complicated. But if you will follow along with me, let us go into our source directory and create a new file here. We are gonna create a file called Redux OG.ts. OG standing for the original way. So this will be the original way of how we set up a Redux application without Redux Toolkit. So once you have done that, open up your terminal because again, we don't have Redux set up. Let me just get something out real quick. So go to your terminal and we're gonna install a couple things that we need whenever we start a Redux application. So what we need is, let's do npm, let me zoom in a little bit more, install, we need Redux, we also need React Redux, we need I also want to install a couple middlewares that we're gonna be using. So let's install a couple. We need Redux DevTools extension that just pretty much allows us to use this little thingy on the Google Chrome. Redux Dunk. We're not going to be really using Redux Dunks. I just want to install it because Redux Toolkit comes with it. And I just want to, and probably most big applications already have Redux Dunk by default if you use Redux Dunk. So I just want to install that here. And also we're going to install this thing called a Redux Logger. So if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. I'll explain it in a little bit. It's just another middleware for our Redux application. And because we have a TypeScript file, I was noticing that I was getting a couple errors because we need to install a couple of type files for some of these packages. And one type file that we need is to add types /React Redux. And we also need add types Redux Logger. So these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 packages that we're going to be installing. Already you could kind of see that it's a little bit crazy setting up a Redux application. But let's press enter and wait for that to finish. All right, so as those packages are installing, I just wanted to give you guys a visual aid of what's going on here so that I know that we're going to be coding a lot right now very soon. So I didn't want to confuse any of you guys. So let's just go over visually what we're going to do real quick. So this is the Redux setup, the old way without using the Redux toolkit. So first of all, this is what our store looks like. We will have 3 different states. It will be sliced up into 3 different parts. Obviously, the most important part is the to-dos part, which will be an array of to-do. Now remember, the to-do type has an ID, which is a string, the description, which is also a string, and also whether it is complete a Boolean, whether it's true or false. And we also have the selected to-do. So depending on which to-do we select, the ID of that to-do will go to our selected to-do. And finally, we got this weird state, counter, which will be a number. And anytime we manipulate our to-dos in any way, whether we create, edit, toggle, or delete, our counter will go up. Now, this might seem pointless, and pretty much it is, but I just wanted to show you guys a feature that I just want to show you guys a feature that Redux Toolkit has, and this counter will be a good example to show that. So just ignore that for now. By the way, this is our application, just to show you guys what's going on. These here in the red circle, these are the to-dos, the list of to-dos, obviously. Here is whenever we select a to-do from our my to-dos, here it goes over here. And the way that the Redux application knows that it's here is because our selected to-do is ID is equal to whatever to-do that we have selected. And finally, here's our counter right here at the very top. Okay, so what are the steps that we need to take to make a Redux application? So number one, this is optional, but this is highly recommended. We must create our action type constants. So this is just making a bunch of string variables, all capitalized because these are constants. And then number two, we gotta create action creators associated with each of our action type constants. And also, because we're doing a TypeScript file, we should give type definitions for each of our actions, like what the actions look like. So yes, a type of a string and also a payload of this and that and so on. Then number three, we should create our three reducers associated with the three different sections of our store. Number four, combine our reducers is fairly simple. We just call the combine reducers function. And number five, we should configure our store and connect our store with our reducers. Okay, so before we finish, let's look over the action types that we're going to be creating. So we first have these four that manipulates the to-dos. So we have the create to-do, edit to-do, toggle to-do. By the way, the toggle to-do just toggles whether it's complete or not. And finally, we have the delete to-do. So these will affect, obviously, the to-dos, the array of to-dos. But not only that, these four, whenever we call upon these actions, it will also increment our counter by 1. So it will affect two parts of our store. And finally, we got one action type for our selected to-do, and we just call that select to-do. And that will only affect our selected to-do store state. All right, so I think our packages have been installed by now, so let's go back to our code. All right, so hopefully that's finished for you guys. So if that have, close your terminal for now. We don't need that. And let's continue building up our reducers, our action creators, and all of that within this redux-og file. Now, I'm not gonna create the store. I'm not gonna add the provider to our index.tsx. I will do that later. For now, I will create the action types, the action creators, the reducers, and all of that stuff in the beginning. So what is the first thing that we need? Now, this is optional, but typically when you create a Redux application, you want your action types written as constants, declared in a constant variable. So let's do that right now. I'm just gonna say these are our constants, and I'm writing this because we're gonna have everything in this one file. So our first constant is gonna be how about create to do, and we're gonna do this very redundant thing where we have the variable name and the value of the string the same thing. A lot of redundancies here. Wink, wink. This will be solved in using Redux Toolkit. But we're gonna have an edit to do, and we are also gonna have, let's see, toggle to do. This will toggle whether it is complete or not. We will also have delete to do. So these are the four action types related to our to-dos. Now we have one action type related to our selected to-do state, and that is select to-do. Now, remember we have three slices of our state. Our final state is going to be the counter, but that won't have any dedicated action types. That will use some of these other action types that's already here. So we won't make any constants action types for this counter state. Now that we're done with the constants, we have to define our actions and the action type. So because we have a TypeScript application, we first have to give types to all of our action types, the actions that our action creators create. So the first action creator that we're gonna create is the create to do. So let's first make an interface, the type for this. And I'm gonna just call this create to do type. I guess we could call it create to do action type because that's technically more accurate. And every action type will have a type, which is gonna be a string, and also an optional payload. So we will say this type will be, how can we do this? So we know that it's gonna be a string, but when I looked at the Redux, the documentation, what they did that I kind of like is they just did type of and the constant that we have declared up here. So this will let it know that it's a string, but you know, it's kind of a little bit more fancy. And it's how the official documentation did it, so I will choose to do it this way as well. The payload for this will be for create to do. It's gonna be an object with three things: the ID, the description, the DESE, and also whether it is complete, the Boolean value. So that's gonna be the type of our to do that we have already defined that comes with this application, the starting code within this page right here. Type.d.ts, our type file. So we're just gonna import this to do type and use it, and when we type our action creator. So let's import that first here. Import to do from, let's see, where is it? Type, that's it. So that's what the type of our payload is gonna be. Now that we have defined the action type for our create to do action creator, let's define our action creator. And let me just, sorry about that. Let me make this full screen so that you guys we have more real estate. All right, so export const, we're gonna be exporting this because we're gonna be using it in our app component later. Create to do action creator, that will be the name of it. And all of my action creators will receive an object as a parameter. And I'm just gonna call this, sorry about that. I'm just gonna call this object data for every single action creator, just to be consistent. So this may not be the most optimal way or the most fast way of doing things, but I like things consistent. And that's one of the purposes of Redux, is that everything is consistent. So all of our action creators will get a parameter that is an object that we will call data. And we will say for this, what does the create to do action creator need? The only thing that it needs is the description, which will be a string, the name of the to do. And this will be a function that outputs the create to do action type, because it returns an action. And let's see, what can we do? Let me first destructure this description from our data. Const description from the data. Now with this data, we're gonna return an action, return an object with type create to do that we make use out of our constant up here, and then a payload as an object is gonna have an ID, and we are gonna make a random ID using the UUID package that this starting kit already came with, the starting repo already came with. So let's import that up here. Import, I'm just gonna get v1 from UUID. So way that you do that is v1 as, let's just call this UUID from UUID, like so. Now, whenever we want to call that to create a unique ID, all we gotta do is UUID and invoke that function like so. And we're going to have a description, which we will get the description from our data. However, because we could use ES6 and this description is the same name, we could just keep it as that, like so. And also is complete. Whenever we create a new to-do, we'll always start off as false. So that is our create to-do action creator. Let's create our edit to-do action creator by first creating the type of it. Edit to do action type. This one will be type of edit to do, and also it will have a payload. For this one, it will have a payload of ID, a string, because we had to know which to do that we're editing, and the new description is gonna have a string as well. And let's see, this is the action type, and then let's create the function, the action creator. Export const edit to do action creator. To be consistent again, we're gonna always have data as our parameter, but this one has an ID, which is a string, and a description, which is also a string, like so. That is the type of our parameter, and this will output edit to do action type that we have just defined. We're going to use ES6 notation just like before. Let's first again destructure the ID and the description from our data. Now we're probably going to be doing this everywhere that we have this data. So instead of wasting this line of code here and wasting a line of code destructuring here, we could just destructure from our parameter too. So why don't we just do that? Let's get this and destructure it here. That cleans up our code somewhat. And we could do the same thing here. Let's grab these two destructuring and just destructure from our parameter. And in this way, we could say return. We're going to return the ID. We could use ES6 notation by not putting a key value pair because it has the same name. And also the description, we could just return it like that. As a matter of fact, we could just put all of these return in one line like so. Now I'm getting a little error here. And it says here, it's not assignable object literally known properties. Oh, I'm getting an error here because I didn't format my action correctly. Action must always have a type. I'm sorry about this. And our type will be edit to do. And our payload is going to be, it will have an ID that we could use ES6 notation to not write the key value pair, and also the description. So now we have typed it correctly. And now let's move on to our toggle action type, interface toggle action type, type of toggle to do, and a payload in this case will be ID, string, and is complete. The new is complete value, and this will be a Boolean. So a lot of boilerplate. Hopefully you guys are already seeing this. Now export const toggle to do action creator. We will destructure right away the ID and description from our parameter. Now the type of this is going to be ID is going to be a string. Description is going to be a string as well. Oh, whoops, I'm sorry, not a description. It's going to be is complete. Is complete. And this will output a toggle action type. And we will return right away type of toggle to do and a payload of ID and is complete, like so. Now I'm getting an error here because this is not a string, this is actually a Boolean. Sorry about that. I'm just kind of looking up here as reference and I'm just copying it too much. So we are done with the toggle to do, and now let's move on to our delete to do interface, delete to do action type. Did I put to do's here? Yeah, edit to do, create to do. So let's also call this toggle to do action type. I'm gonna grab this and where I use it here, and I'm just gonna move my cursor and put toggle to do action type like so. Toggle to do action creator. There we go. Delete to do action type. Type of delete to do. Payload in this case. The only thing we need here is the ID, which will be a string. And then export const delete to do action creator. We will destructure right away the ID, and the type of our parameter is just ID, which is a string. And this will output a delete to do action type, and we will return type of action creator. I just completely spelled this wrong. Type is going to be delete to do, and the payload spelled return wrong, and payload is going to be just the ID like so. Let me run Predator on it real quick. All right, so we are finally done with our action creators for our to-do state. Now, for our select to-do state, we need just one action creator. And I'm going to call this, we first got to give it a type, select to-do action type. And this one will be a type of select to-do. And a payload is going to be just the ID, like so. And export const select to do action creator. This will just have an ID. We'll destructure the ID, and the type of this is going to be ID, which is a string. And we're going to output select to do action type. and we will return right away type select to do and the payload of ID. Now I am getting an error here. I'm not sure why, because I put IS here. Guys, I'm really sorry about all these typos. It's just I'm writing so much redundant code right now that my brain just kind of turning off. I'll try to get better from now on. But pretty much we are done with our action types and our action creators. So now we're gonna move on to our reducers. So we're gonna create 3 reducers, and we're gonna use combined reducers from them to combine them later. The 3 reducers will correspond to the 3 states that we have: the to-do states, the list of to-dos, the selected to-do state, which will just give us the ID of the to-do that is selected, and also the counter that keeps track of the number of the many times that we have mutated our to-dos list. Okay, so let's first create the to-do reducer, and I will export this as well. Export const, let me first write it here that we are now in the reducer section just to make sure we don't get confused. Export const to-dos reducer. I'm not sure if I actually need to export this. You know what? I'm not going to export this. I'm just going to declare it as const to-dos reducers. And reducers will always receive a state, and the state that we are dealing with is a list of to-dos. This type, we got it from our type definition file. And let's see. We also, this is very important, whenever we're creating reducers the traditional way, we must always give a default value to our state. Otherwise, we're gonna get an error. So the default value, typically you just put an empty array like this. And we're also gonna have an action. Now, what type, if we're gonna type this action, what's the type that this to-dos reducer will get? So let's create that first. I'm gonna create it right above our to-dos reducer. I'll call this type to-do action types. And it will be a combination of the create to-do action type we have defined above, or edit to-do action type, or toggle to-do action type, or delete to-do action type. Like so. So now our action will be one of these types. Okay, now this will return a function like so. And let's see, we have to put a switch scenario here. But before we go on, I don't want to initialize my list of to-dos as an empty array, because that means every time I refresh this page, I gotta create a bunch of these. So let's just put as an initial state, let's put this learn React, learn Redux, and learn Redux toolkit in our initial state. So the way that I am going to do that is go back to the app component and go to the index.tsx. It kind of looks like this, the long one. And you see this list of to-dos here. Let's just make this our initial to-do state. So I'm just gonna copy this. You could cut it out too, I think. No, but that's gonna break our code. So let's just copy this. Right above our reduce, or right below this line, I'm gonna paste that in. We already have UUID imported, so nothing's breaking. We could invoke that function here without any trouble. And instead of calling this const to-dos, let's call this to-dos initial state. And we will default our state with to-dos initial state. I think that's better. Now we're gonna have a switch case situation here. So switch, we're gonna switch the action type. Our first case is gonna be create to-do. If this is the case, what do we want to do? Now, without Redux Toolkit, one thing very important that we have to do within our reducers, and this is nothing new, this has been part of Redux for the longest time, we can't mutate our state parameter directly. We have to return a new state that has not mutated the previous state. So this is where sometimes it can get a little bit tricky and a little bit tedious to write all this, but you know what? We just have to deal with it. So when we're creating a to-do, what we do is we spread the previous state that we have, the list of to-dos that we have, and the new to-do that we got that is within our action.payload. Let's just tack that on the end of the array like so. Now that's gonna be our create to-do case. Our second case is gonna be edit to do. And how do we edit the to do? So before we go on, let me first extract. You're gonna be seeing this action.payload everywhere. As a matter of fact, why don't we just extract the type and the payload from our action, like so. Type and payload, like so. That way we could just say switch type and return, add the payload to our array that we're returning. Now for the edit to do, let's do this. We gotta go through our list of our list of to-dos, find the ID that corresponds to that's in our payload, and then just only update that one while keeping every other to-dos intact. So the way that I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna do return state.map. Map always returns a new version of our array. We will loop through our to-dos and we will do this. If to-do.id is equal to our payload's ID, then we will give it a new to-do, to-do with the, let's see, what's within our payload. Within our payload, I believe for the edit to-do, let's see, select to-do, toggle edit, we have the description, right? So the only thing we got to update is the description. So description is gonna be payload.description, like so. Now I'm getting an error. Why is that? You know what? I changed my mind. I'm sorry about this. I'm just gonna put action type here. I'm not gonna destructure it from our parameter. I'm just gonna call this, make this as action, and I'm gonna destructure it after. I'm gonna destructure it here. Const payload action XX. So the reason why Typescript was erroring out because it didn't associate our case situation with our payload. So it didn't know that our payload now has a description. So that's why I'm going back to this way of writing things. It's because of TypeScript. But it's not too bad. So I will keep it as this. Otherwise, if the to-do.id that we're iterating over is equal to the payload.id, we will give a new payload, we will give a new to-do where we update the description like so. Otherwise, we just return back the to-do because we don't care about the to-do. So this is how we edit a to-do. Let me run prettier on it real quick. Now let's do case toggle to-do. And this will look very similar to our edit to-do. Let me first destructure out the payload from our action and return state.map to-do.id is triple equals to the payload ID. If that is the case, destructure the to-do. And then instead of the description this time, we're going to do is complete. It's going to be payload.isComplete. Else, if our to-do is not the ID that we're iterating over, then just give back the to-do. Okay, so we have one more case here. I mean, besides the default case. Case delete to-do const payload from the action. Let me run prettier real quick. And then return. So how do we delete element in an array? So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to invoke the filter function, filter method upon our array. So state.filter. We're going to iterate over our to-dos, and I'm going to filter in all the to-dos whose ID is not equal to the ID within our payload's ID, like so. So this is our to-dos reducer. Now, if I continue building my other reducers with leaving this as it is, then I will run into an error because I forgot the default as all to-dos, all reducers must have a default case. So our default is just going to return, if I could just spell it correctly, we're gonna return just the state itself. So now we are done with our to-dos reducer. Let's now create the other reducers too. Let's create our select to-do reducer. So we'll first give it a type, selected to-do action types, but this will only have one. Selected to-do action type, like so. Now let's define our reducer, selected to do reducer is gonna be a state. We're gonna initialize this as null. However, we gotta be very careful because of TypeScript. Let me first write out the action. This is gonna be a selected to do action types. And this will return a function. Let me run pretty real quick. Okay, so why is this dangerous? Look at what TypeScript thinks the state is right now. Now, TypeScript only thinks the state is gonna be a null type, but that's not true. It could also be a string type, right? Because it's the ID. So we gotta say that this will be either a string or null, like so. Now, just like before, we're gonna switch the action type. And then we're gonna have case. What's our case? Select to do. Then, let me put the curly brace. Then we're gonna first always destructure the payload from our action. And return, what do we want to return? We just want to return the payload.id, which is a string, as you can see here. And we need a default case, so default will just be return state, like so. We will also have our final reducer, but this one, let's see. We don't, let me just define the reducer without defining the type. Const counter reducer. This will be a state, and the state will always be a number, which we will default as 0. And the action for this, notice we didn't define the action type that we typically do for our other reducers. And the reason is because the action types that he's interested in are actually all the action types for the to-dos reducer. The counter reducer cares about the create to-do action type, edit to-do action type, toggle to-do action type, and delete to-do action type. So let's just write to-do action types here, because those are the types that he's interested in. We will switch the action.type, and again, case, create to do. Then we want to, what do we want to do? We want to increment, return state plus 1. We're going to see a lot of redundancies here. Case, edit to do. We also want to return state plus 1. Case, toggle to do. Return state plus 1. And finally, case, although not finally, because we have one more actually, the default state, return state plus 1. And the default, which we cannot forget about, is just gonna return the state. Okay, we are finally done with all of our reducers. Here are our 3 reducers. And now we're gonna combine the reducers, which I will put in a variable called reducers. But we gotta first import the combined reducers first from Redux. Let's bring that over here. Where can we get it? Oh, we don't have any Redux imports it right now, huh? So let's put that on the top of the file, which we'll call import combine reducers from Redux. Now let's make use out of that here. Combine reducers. Put an object inside, which will get a bunch of key value pairs. Let's see. I will call my first state the list of to-dos just to-dos, and to-dos reducer. And then selected to-do is my second state. Selected to-do reducer. And finally, the counter, which is going to be the counter reducer, like so. Okay, so now that we have these reducers that is combined all into one, what we have to do is we gotta feed this into our store, right? So we have to create a store, and we will export it out of this file as a default export, and we will use that in our outer index.tsx file. But before we use this, we gotta get the create store from Redux. Create store, and we will make this the default export. Here is the store. Export default create store. This needs the reducers that we have created just above. And we will have middlewares in a bit, but let's just make sure that this works. Let me save. Okay, so let's make use. Let's plug this store into our provider. Let's go to our index, outer index.tsx. Let me zoom in here real quick. Okay, so we have to put a provider here, but let's import that first from our React Redux that we have installed. I'm gonna put it just below our React DOM import. I will say import provider from React Redux. And let's make use out of this. Put the provider wrapper here, the store. We also need the store, but let me just ignore that for now. And close it. Surround our app with it. Now we need to give a store prop to this, and we're just gonna import store from our Redux OG file, like so. And we will feed that to our provider. So now everything should be connected. However, there's no way for us to tell because one, our Redux DevTools is not connected. We didn't install that. Nor are we making use out of the logger middleware that we have installed. So let's start connecting those middlewares to our Redux our toolkit. Not our toolkit. What do we call this? Our provider. So I'm gonna go back to my redux.og because that has my create store call right here at the very bottom. And let's go back to this file. And we are going to give this a series of middleware. So the first two middleware that I'm thinking about is, let me just put it right here, the dunk from Redux dunk. Now, full transparency, we're not going to be making any dunk action creators. No dunk functions here. However, I'm just doing this because the Redux toolkits by default comes with Redux dunk. And most applications again typically uses Redux dunk. So I'll just show you guys how we could connect our Redux with Redux dunk. And we're also going to import logger from Redux logger. This will just put nice things in our console, in our terminal. So to add the middleware here, we have to first import this thing called apply middleware from Redux. And we also need one more thing. Let me see what that's called. redux.js.org. It's eluding me right now. And in my defense, there's just so much things, so much boilerplate connected with Redux that it's impossible really to just remember all these things. The one that I'm thinking about is compose. So let's import compose from Redux. So how do we add our middlewares to our store? So I'm just gonna copy this right here, and we will say, let me just make it like that. Put a comma here. Let's make it a little bit neater by putting lines like that. And we will put compose, apply middleware that is dunk, and also apply middleware that is logger, like so. So a lot of stuff that we have to do. Now we didn't even install the DevTools. Now fortunately for us, the Redux DevTools, it came with this new import that does this compose function for us. So let's just import that. It's called, let me import it right below these guys. Import compose with DevTools from Redux DevTools extension, like so. Let me full screen this. Now that we're gonna use this compose with DevTools function, we don't need the original compose from Redux. So how we use this is we put compose with DevTools instead, and we put these apply middleware dunk and apply middleware logger inside instead. As a matter of fact, I made a slight mistake. When you apply middleware, you could just give the middlewares as arguments like so. You don't need to apply middlewares. So this is all that you need. apply middleware, dunk, comma, logger, like so. Now I think our store is finally connected and we can see it. Do you see this green light? It's all lit up. So that means our Redux Dev Tools is connected finally. Let me just open this up so that it's easier for us to see. Let's check out our initial state. Our to-dos has the 3 to-dos that we have populated it with. If you guys can see that, our selected to-do is null and our counter is defaulted to 0. So this is good. Obviously, none of our buttons still work because we didn't connect any of our action creators to it, but we will do that soon enough. But it's fortunate. All this code that we have right here, we have 204 lines of code inside our redux-og file. This is all the boilerplate that we needed to connect Redux to our application. Now that that is finally done and out of the way, let's go back to our app component, functional component file. We don't need this to-dos in the very top. So let's get rid of that. And we don't need these hard-coded in states right here, selected to-do ID and the edited count. So let's get rid of those. I don't think we need this UUID import. And do I need that to-do type? I think I do. So I'll just keep that for now. However, I need a couple things from the React Redux library. And by the way, I am not going to be using the traditional putting the connect and the map dispatch to props, map state to props, all that stuff. I'm going to be using the hooks that React Redux library comes with nowadays. So let's do import, let's see, from React Redux. We will import use selector to select things from our store, our state, and also use dispatch to get the dispatch function. Okay, so at the very top, I'm gonna declare const of our functional component const use dispatch. Oh no, sorry. Dispatch is equal from use dispatch. Now we have access to the dispatch function. We are also gonna select each of our states from our store. So the way that we're gonna do that is I'm gonna declare const to-dos is gonna be, let's see, use selector, and we gotta pass in a function here, state. By the way, this state right now, Typescript doesn't know what file it is. So let's type our state of our store, and we're gonna make use, going back to our type file, we're gonna make use of the state type that we haven't used so far. So let's import that first. Go back to our component. Not only do we want to do from our type file, but we also want a state. State, and we just want to select the to-dos, like so. That will be our to-dos, and const selected to-do ID will be use selector state dot selected to-do. Const, let's see, what else do we need? What did I call the counter variable before? I called it the edited count. So const edited count, use selector state counter, like so. Now let's see if we still see our to-dos, and we see them here. However, because our initial value of our selected to-do is null, nothing is selected here anymore, and we have our empty statement here. It says no to-do selected. So now I know that it is connected. Now let's start using our action creators one by one. Let me first import that at the very top. Right below our React Redux import, let's import our action creators from, what file was that called? Redux-og. Although it should be from, like, we gotta go up a directory and then get it from redux.og, like so. We have the create to do action creator, we have the edit to do action creator, the toggle to do action creator, delete to do action creator, and the select to do action creator. Let's run prettier on that. Okay. So let's go through these one by one. Let me try making it like this so that we have some space and we can see what's going on. Okay, so our first event handler, our method, is called the handle new input change. We don't need to change anything here because all this is doing is updating our state variable, which is new to do input. So let's move on to our next event handler, which is handle edit input change, and this is pretty much the same thing. All it does is it updates our state. What we are interested in right now is the handle create new to do. In this method, we will dispatch the new to do that we have just created. And before we do anything though, before we create a new to do, we gotta first check to make sure that we have some string values within our new to do input. So we will say if not new to do input dot length. If there is nothing there, if it's just an empty string, we will return. I don't even need these curly braces here. Just return like so. Do nothing. Otherwise, we will say dispatch. We will dispatch our action using our action creator. And the one that we want is the create to do action creator. Dispatch create to do action creator. And what does this receive? Looking at my autocomplete, we need the description. So description is gonna be the new to do input, like so. That's all that we need. And within our action creator, we generate our unique ID and also set the is complete value as false. Once we have done that, we gotta reset our new to do input back to an empty string for a better UX experience. And I think that's it. Now let's see if that works. I'm gonna go back to my browser. Let's type in test. I click create and we got a new one here. So now it is working. As a matter of fact, if we open up our dev tools right here, I look at my state change. Check this out right here. Did you see this create to do? Let's refresh and see if that gets logged here. So testing, and now you see this create to do. We could create another one and we see more. So that is good. Let's go back to finishing our events. We have handle select to do. Now this one looks kind of weird like this. Hopefully you guys are kind of used to this. For the handle select to do, where is it? This gets called whenever we click on one of these here up within our list. And you can see it here. However, we have to know which to do we have selected. That is why I'm giving it a parameter of the ID of the to do right here. You can see that right here. So we have for our handle select to do, it gets a parameter, which is a to do ID, and returns a function because all of our event handlers have to be a reference to a function. So that's what we're gonna do here. Now we gotta find the to do that we have selected, but no, we already know the ID of it. So all we gotta do is just dispatch the select to do action creator. This takes an object as always, and all it cares about is the ID. So we'll say ID is to do ID, like so. Let's see if that works. I'm gonna refresh the page. I click on these and now you can see these popping up here. What if we create a new one and we could select that one as well? So that is working now as intended. That's good. We could ignore the use effect as I said before. Handle the update. So what handle update does is once we click edit and we want to edit this value here, once we click this, it will call this handle update method here. So we first gotta check, just like the create new to do, we gotta say if edit to do input dot length. If there is no length to it, then we're just gonna return, not do anything. Actually, do we just want to return? I don't think we want to return, because then what's gonna happen? Let me show you guys what happens. We go back here, I edit this, I empty it out, I click update and nothing happens. So if we click update here, I guess the best user experience is to show an error message, but I don't want to waste time writing all that error message out right now. So all I'm gonna do, if this is the case, we will say, we will do something. We will do handle cancel update right here. Do I want to give an E? This E will become optional because once I call this E here, the handle, oh, actually we have an E. No. So this handle cancel update expects a mouse event from an HTML button element. However, we don't have access to the E parameter here. So to appease TypeScript, we're gonna say that this E is optional. And if it exists, we'll prevent the default, like so. Otherwise, we'll just call it without that parameter. And now that we have done that, we're just gonna return, not do anything else. Let's see if that works. edit. What if we made it empty? We update and it does nothing. All right, so that's better than airing out. Okay, so, or not doing anything. Now, assuming that there is a length to it, we want to update it, right? So we will say dispatch edit to do action creator. What does this need? ID, which is gonna be our selected to do ID, like so. And the description is going to be our edit to do input, like so. Now this is airing out because it thinks the ID that this edit to do action creator needs is a string, and that string has to be there. However, our selected to do ID could either be a string or a null. So we must also have a check here where we say or not selected ID to do ID. If that also doesn't exist, then just return, cancel update and return. So now it's no longer airing out because the moment we get to this line, we know for a fact, TypeScript knows for a fact that selected to do ID is not null. So that's good. I think that will work. Let's see if that works. Let me write test here. Let's edit that. What's a to do? Something that we want to do. Master Redux Toolkit. How about that? We click update and it's here. However, it's not getting rid of this. We want to get rid of this file, go back to the non-editing mode. So let's take care of that here. Where were we? After we dispatch, we're going to set to do edit to do set is edit mode back to false and set edit to do input back to an empty string, like so. Let's see if that works. I'm going to edit this to master. I update and it goes back to this. And we could edit something else and everything's fine. So that's good. Okay, now handle cancel update is already done. We know that because if I click cancel here, it just goes back to where we were. We got to do handle toggle now. I already added here, if not selected to do ID or not selected to do. What is it selected to do? Is using our selected to do ID up here. If I could find it. If we have a selected to do ID, then we find the to do that we have selected from our to do's array, or we set it as null. So that's what the selected to do is. And where were we? We are here, handle toggle. So if they don't exist, then don't do anything because we got nothing to select. We don't know what to select. But if they do exist, all we got to do is dispatch toggle. Let's see, what do we want to do? Handle, no, toggle to do action creator. I feel like I'm missing something. Yes, sorry, I thought this was about the selecting. This is actually about toggling. So we first check, does it have a to do ID or a selected to do? Then don't do anything because we need to toggle something, we must have a to do selected. So if we have a to do selected, what does this need? It needs an ID and it is complete. So ID will be the selected to do ID. And then the is complete is going to be the opposite of our selected to do that is complete, like so. So let's see if that works. I go here and I toggle and now the structure is gone, the structure is back. So it seems to be working. And by the way, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but every single time I do an action like so, you see this counter going up. So every time we toggle, that counter is going up. And if I delete this, that counter also goes up. But of course, I can't delete it because I didn't handle that yet. If I edit this, notice it was at 31. Now we're at 32. If we create one, that counter goes up as well. So that's what this counter does. Now let's get our last method out of the way. If selected to do ID does not exist, then return. Otherwise, dispatch delete to do action creator with ID. It's going to be the selected to do ID, like so. Technically, after this, we should unselect the selected one because the selected ID is no longer exists. However, it's not going to break our code, so it's fine. I'll leave it as it is. Let me test this out. Testing. Let's delete this one. And that works. And also this counter went up too. So we are finally done with this application. By the way, if you guys were curious about what the logger does, that's what this does here. Open up your terminal. Every time you perform an action, it logs this. Do you see this? I toggle. It tells us what action was passed. It tells us the previous state of our store and the next state of our store. That's what this logger dependency, this middleware does for us. So it could be useful if you want this type of stuff, but sometimes it will also get very overwhelming, especially if a big application with a lot of Redux store the state being updated. Okay, so this was, by the way, we don't need this type here. So let's just get rid of the import. This was setting up a Redux application using the traditional way of setting up a Redux store, of first creating constants, action types, the constants related to our action types, the typing each of our actions, and also creating action creators for all of our actions that we have. And then we go down here, creating all of our reducers with this crazy initialization state, these switch and case statements, making sure that we don't forget about the default, and then combining the reducers later. And then finally, calling this create store function that Redux comes with, adding our reducers in here, and also adding our middleware inside here, using all of these complicated logic right here. So Redux, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to try to implement the same thing using Redux Toolkit. Now, in case you guys are kind of burning out because this was kind of long, it won't be as long as this one. Hence the reason why Redux Toolkit can be so beneficial for us. Not only that, our app.index is done. So once we finish our Redux Toolkit, the only thing we got to do is change our create to do action creator, all these edit to do action creator, all these stuff with the action creators that our Redux Toolkit has gives us. So don't worry too much. We don't have to do all these event handlers anymore. We're done with this. Okay, so now let's go back to our source file and make a new file. This will be similar to the redux-og. We will call this one redux-toolkit.ts. So we're gonna implement pretty much the same thing we have in this redux-og file inside our Redux Toolkit file. But before we do that, we must first install Redux Toolkit. So let's open up our terminal, do npm I Redux Toolkit. Actually, it's actually hyphen, what was it? Let me just get it's gonna be at redux.js/toolkit. Now, we already have, because of our first way that we set up this store, we manually installed the dev tools, we manually installed the Redux Dunk, and we also installed Redux. But if you were to not go that path and start this application using Redux Toolkit, you don't have to install any of those. The only thing you gotta install is the Redux Toolkit and also React Redux. So mine has just finished. So let's first import. All right, so we're gonna import a couple things from our handy Redux Toolkit. Let me first write Redux.js Toolkit here. And I am getting import from Redux Toolkit. So what are the couple things that we want to use? So let's import the things as we use them. So the first thing we're gonna use is this create slice. So again, this create slice, as I mentioned before, it will pretty much combine. This is a super useful way and a handy way and an efficient way of combining our action constant. Remember, we created the constants in our redux.og file. All these constants that we have here, we have the variable name and the string, pretty much the same thing, a lot of boilerplate here. Then we created the action types for each of our actions. And look how redundant this is. We know that every single action type is going to have a type, right? But we still have to put a type manually here, put a payload here, create all of our action creators, and then we go finally create all of our reducers. So we don't have to do all of this with using the Redux Toolkit. The only thing we got to do is think about the slices of our store, our state, the slice of to-dos. We have three states, right? We have the to-dos, we have the selected to do, and we have the counter. So we just have to use this create slice function upon those three places, and it will automatically generate the action type constants, the action creators. All we gotta do is give it the reducers, and we don't have to do this crazy switch case statement, make sure that we have an initial state for everything. Otherwise, our code's gonna break. And also have this default, because again, our code's gonna break if we don't have this. Redux Toolkit will help prevent us from doing a lot of that stuff. Now, I might regret doing this right now, but just for comparison, let me open this side by side like so, and let's zoom in, full screen this right here. All right, we don't need a terminal, so let's close that. Hopefully you guys could still see correctly. Let me just put a little bit more space upon here. Now, again, I guess we don't need our directory folders anymore for now. So first thing we gotta do is, do you remember within our create to do, our to-dos reducer, we gave an initial value of this, the to-dos initial state, which we got here, right? So let's just copy this because we're gonna use this initial state for our to-do for our Redux Toolkit version 2. So let's just paste that in. My IDE automatically imported the to-do type from the type and the v1 as UUID from the UUID file. So if you don't have this, make sure you import these two as well. And just to be proper, I like putting these imports in the top and my own imports in the bottom. Now let's create our first slice function. We will call this, should we call this? The to-dos. I'm just gonna call this to-dos. You can call it to-dos. Let's call it to-do slice. Create slice accepts an object of a couple required key value pairs. The first one that it needs is the name. And we will give this name to-dos. Name to-dos. How about to-dos? And the initial state, we got to give it an initial state. So instead of doing this vague parameter default state that we could always forget about, create slice requires us to give it an initial state like this so that we can no way forget. Otherwise, our code editor will give us an error message like so. So we will say this will be initial state, and the reducers is our final thing that we need. And we have a couple reducers for our to-dos, right? We have the create to-do, edit to-do, toggle to-do, and delete to-do, right? I don't want to start out with the create to-do because we're going to do a little bit different, something different for that later. So let's start out with our edit to-do. Now, we don't need to do all this switch case situation. What this reducer takes, it takes an object of key value pairs. The key will be the name of our action type that it will automatically generate for us. And the value is going to be a function that gets returned with the action type, with the action that it sends. So our first reducer is going to be edit, skipping the create. We don't need to use capital case anymore because the reason why we use capital case within the traditional way of creating a Redux application is because we're putting them in constant strings like this. And the tradition is whenever you have constant strings like this, you put them in a capital variable name like so. But because we don't have those anymore, we don't need to use all these crazy capital cases any longer. So our edit will be, this gets a state, and this state corresponds to our initial state. So if I hover over this state, I'll hover over later. It doesn't know about it yet. So let's see, what do we need to give? We also got to give it an action. This will be the action, the type, and the payload. To type this now, do you remember how we typed it before? We had this type and the payload, right? So Redux Toolkit comes with this handy import, which I will import here. And it's called the payload action type. So all we gotta do to type our action is call this, and pretty much within these triangle brackets, we just have to type our payload. So when you use create slice, the action must always have a payload. Within the old way of doing things, the payload keyword was optional. You could have just as easily called this anything else, but here you must have a payload and you will automatically create a payload for us. Now, the good thing about using this payload action is we don't have to give it a type, property type for our type file all the time. This will automatically handle that for us. So our edit to do action type is just this, the ID of a string required and description string required, like so. And what we do is we're going to return a function. So let's see what we want to do. Now, if you remember what I said, and by the way, let's check out the type of our state. As you can see, it's just a list of to-dos. So if you remember in the very beginning what I said, the one thing good about this Redux toolkit is it comes with the Immer library where we can mutate, quote unquote, mutate our state value directly instead of returning an immutable state like what we do. Where do we do it? Our edit to do. These are our action creators. Go back to our reducers. Yeah, it's here. We call this map function here because we don't want to mutate our initial state. But because of Immer, we now have the ability to mutate our state, quote unquote, mutate our state directly, and Immer will take care of that and give us an immutable state, quote unquote, magically in the backend. You could also do it the traditional way if you want, but let's take advantage of using Immer here. So what we gotta do is we gotta first find within our state the to-do that we're editing. So let's do that here. We will say, before we go on, let's talk about what our action is. So let me hover over this. It has a payload just like before that we have typed it here, and it also has a type, but which we will probably never use within our reducers. So at least within this function here, we will use it elsewhere. But let's see, what do I want to do? I want to first find our state is an array, right? I gotta find the ID associated within our state. So let's do that right now. I will say, before that, let me just destructure the payload. And why don't we just destructure the payload from our action here? Like so. We won't have the issue that we had with Typescript earlier, if you remember. So we could do that here directly. Okay, so we will say, const, let's find the index. Index is going to be state dot, I'm going to call the find index method. And we want to get the to-do's ID, whose to-do ID is equal to our payload's ID, like so. So if this find index didn't find any to-do with the same ID that we had it for whatever reason, then we have an error, right? And if that was the case, this index will equal -1. So if we will say index is not equal to -1, then and only then we will do something. Because if it's not equal to -1, that means we did find a valid index. So we will say, what do we want to do? We know we're updating the description, right, of our state. So let's get our state at the index that we found, and we will mutate its description directly by updating it with payload.description. Now, this will never work in the traditional way without Immer. But because of Immer, we can mutate it directly and not return anything. And Immer will magically convert this and update our state for us. Hey guys, this is me from the future. I was editing my video and I realized, I was wondering to myself why I use this find index. By the way, let's look at this one right now. This is all spoiler territory right here. So don't look at that, please. So on the edit, look at what I'm doing here. I am using the find index method to find the index, and if we have found the index, I update like this. But however, we don't have to do it like this. As a matter of fact, I think this is more confusing on hindsight. So if I were to go back in time and do this, what I would have done is just, instead of calling the find index, just call the find function on it. Like find method on it like this. And instead of it being an index now, we will either have the to-do to edit, let's just call it to-do to edit. And if we hover over this, this will either be the to-do that we have found successfully, or if we didn't find anything, it will be undefined. So what we can do now is, if to-do to edit exists, then instead of doing all this nonsense here, all we gotta do is to-do to edit dot description is gonna be payload dot description. I think this is much cleaner. And by the way, this only works right here. This mutation right here only works because of Immer. Keep that in mind. You can't do this without Redux Toolkit. So I think this is much cleaner. And if you look at my sneak peek preview of the toggle, you could do the same thing here. Maybe call it like to-do to toggle and all that stuff. And if to-do to toggle exists, then update it. Again, I'm sorry that I use this find index. However, the find index still works. So it's not an issue. It's just that for clarity, I think the state.find is a much cleaner solution than the solution that I have had on the video. Anyways, back to the video. So that is our edit. We are done with that reducer. Let's do our delete remove reducer. Our toggle reducer. And it will look very similar to this. So let's see. We first get a state. We will destructure the payload from our action. Use the payload action. And this one gets an ID of string, but not a description. And in this case is complete, which is a Boolean. Okay, so let's do the same thing. Const index, let's find the index. I'm just gonna bring this code over here. And if index is not equal to -1, we will say state.index.isComplete is going to be payload.isComplete, like so. So already, hopefully you guys are seeing that this is much easier to do than this map property and all that stuff. We also have a delete to do. Now, again, here's another thing that I forgot to mention. Look how simple these keys are right now. We're not calling this edit to do. We're not calling this toggle to do. We had to do that here because imagine if we had a very big application. Let's say we had our state of to-dos and we had a state of products of the users. You can't, each of them will have an edit action creator. Each of them will have a create and all that stuff. That's why we gotta give description names to our action type. However, and I will show you guys in a bit, we don't have to do that any longer with this to-do slice. And the key is that it gets this name to do, and it will magically, automatically create us or give us a new, unique, identifying way of distinguishing our action creators, our action types. I will show you guys that in a bit. But I initially was tempted to call this key delete, but we can't call it delete because delete is a reserved keyword in JavaScript. So let's just call this remove instead, like so. State payload. What is the payload of our delete? Payload action, and I think it's just the ID. Let's see. Yes. So this will return. How should we do this? Okay, so remove is actually, notice here we are filtering all the to-dos whose ID is not equal to our payload's ID. We don't have to do that here. What we have to do, and I'm not sure why I'm getting an error. Oh, it's because I should have comma here instead. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so this is actually very easy to do. Let's find first our index, just like before. So I'm gonna grab this line of code where we find the index, and we will say if index is not equal to -1, then and only then we will say state at index. How do we delete this one? Actually, we don't even need to do that because we could use the splice method that arrays comes with in JavaScript. So splice, it takes two parameters required. We first give the starting index, which we will give the index, and we give the delete count. How many elements starting from the index do we want to delete? Now we just only want to delete one. And the good thing about this splice method is that it mutates our array in place without returning a new array. So in a typical old school way of creating our Redux application, you will never use splice in a reducer. You would use something like slice or filter or map, but you will never use splice. However, we could do it here in our code. I think it looks much cleaner. And another good thing is we don't need to give it a default state here. All this boilerplate here, putting a default on every single one of our reducers. We don't need to do that here. That's another good thing about this create slice. But now let's take care of our create reducer that we have skipped in the beginning. So this again will take a state, has a state, and the second parameter is we will destructure right away the payload action. And the only thing that we're getting within our payload is the description, which will be a string. But now we have a problem. Let me just make sure that my editor is not complaining to me. One key aspect is, remember this create slice, it automatically creates us action creators associated with our reducers. However, how would the action creator that it automatically create give us? Let's look at the action creator for our create within our old way of doing things. Notice how we invoke the UUID function here. We generate a random ID and we put it into our payload called the ID. How are we possibly going to do that within our reducer? Because we don't create the action creators ourselves. This create slice function creates the action creators for us. So how does he do this for us? And the answer is it can't. By default, it can't, unless we explicitly tell it to by using the create create action and the create reducer that this toolkit library comes with. Unless we don't use that, with using the create slice, we gotta take a different approach. So this reducer's key takes the key value pairs. The key is the action type name, and the value is typically we're giving it a function. We could set this up a different way. And another way that we could set this up is not just putting a function there, but an object. So that's what we're gonna do here. Instead of giving the value of this key a function like what we did here, we're gonna give it an object instead, like so. And this object that we could use has two keys. One's called the reducer, which is all the reducer that we've been making so far. And the next one that's interest to us is called the prepare. So what this prepare does is it gets our action and it prepares our action in a way that our reducer can use it. So with the reason why we're doing this, because reducers have to be pure. But by creating this random ID within our reducer itself, we are no longer making our reducer pure. And that goes against the laws of reducer. So that's when we have to use this fancy way of, another way of using this create slice. So let's start out with our prepare first. So what prepare does is it gets the action type that our automatically generated action creator has given us. And we feed it a couple more properties into the payload. Okay, so let's do this. Let's first destructure. The parameter that it receives is the payload that this action type, that the action creator automatically generated for us. And the only one that we are interested in is a description. And we're gonna type this. Description is a string. We're destructuring it right away from our payload. And we're just gonna return a new payload right away. Therefore, I won't have all this return stuff going on here. And the new payload, we gotta give it an object with the payload key. This will be our new payload. And that is gonna have an ID, which we will call UUID. It will have a description that we get from our parameter. And also is complete by default will be false. Let me run prettier on this, but I can't. I might be missing. Oh, it's because I have something here. Okay, so now this create goes through the prepare function first, makes a new payload, and that payload in turn gets fed to our reducer here. So now we could say state and also our destructured payload action. And because this reducer went through our prepare function here first, we now have access to the ID, which we created here. We have the description, and we also, and we also have the is complete, which is a Boolean. Like so. And let's put a comma here. There we go. Let me run prettier on it real quick. And let's edit this line of code right here. Ooh, I don't like how that looks. Whatever. Okay, so what do we want to do? So now that, and again, we are doing this because because action creators are automatically generated for us, there was no place for us to give this random unpure function call within our reducer. So that's why we are doing this alternate way of setting up our reducers within our create slice. This prepare that prepares our payload in a certain way that we desire, and then it in turn gives it to this reducer. Very handy. All right, so we are just gonna, let's see. We're gonna put add, what did we do within the create reducer in the old way of doing it? we spread the old state because we can't mutate it, and we gave it the new payload, right? However, here we could do something much more simple. All we got to do, because of Immer, we could just do state.push. That would never be allowed in the old way of doing things. However, because of Immer, we could do this now. And the only thing we're pushing now is payload, like so. Now, this is our to-do slice. So this is finished. Now let's go ahead and create our other slice functions. Next one will be const selected to-do slice. Create slice. Require, we gotta give it a name. I'll call this selected to-do. We gotta give it an initial state. We gotta do something special here, just like before. Let me go down in my old Redux file and notice what we did for the state. We defaulted as null, but we explicitly typed it, telling Typescript know that it's not only null, but it could also be a string. So we gotta do something similar here. The way that we do that is we defaulted as null, but we let Typescript know that this could be either string or null, like so. And our reducers. We only have one reducer here. Select state action is going to be payload action. ID is going to be a string. And let's destructure just the payload right away from our action. And we will just, you will be tempted right now. By the way, this is very important right now. Our initial state, unlike our to-dos slice, in our to-do slice, our initial state was an array, meaning arrays are objects, right? Objects and arrays, because arrays are objects, they're not primitive values. So typically, you weren't able to mutate it like this, but what Immer does for us is it takes non-primitive values like objects and arrays, and when we mutate them directly like this, it kind of does its own magic and gives us an immutable return object so that our Redux won't complain about it. However, the state that we're dealing with here in the selected to-do slice is not an object. It is a primitive value. Both string and null are primitive values. So if you turned off your brain for a second, you got used to this Redux Toolkit way of doing things, you might be tempted, as I was, just to do, let's see, state, what do we do? State is equal to the payload ID. Mutate the state directly like this. However, this will not work with primitive values as a state. I was actually talking with the maintainer of Redux Toolkit and the whole Redux library in general all about this. I was hoping that this could work, but he explained to me that this is actually impossible to do. So unfortunately, you can't do this. So when you're dealing with primitive values in the state, just do it the typical way of just returning the new state. We're gonna say we're just gonna return right away the payload ID like so. So that's one thing to watch out for. Hopefully that made sense. Now that's our selected to-do slice, very short and concise. And we have our final slice, which is called the counter. So const counter slice, create slice. And hopefully this example will show you why I made this random counter in my application. So this reducer is a little bit different because look at what is happening in our OG file. It's getting the action types from another section of the store. These create to do, edit to do, toggle to do, delete to do, these aren't actually associated with its own slice, with the what is this called? The counter part of our store. These are related to the to-dos, right? So how does the way that the create slice is set up is it only gets the action types associated with this own slice, with its own state. However, this create slice, this counter slice needs action types, actions that is from the other states, which is from here. So how can we configure that here? So actually, the maintainer of Redux Toolkit thought about that, and he added an extra handy key value pair that we could create within, put within the create slice function. And that's what we're gonna do here. So we have, first, we always gotta give it a name, which we will just call counter. Initial state is going to be a 0, and reducers, it actually doesn't have its own reducers, right? So we gotta just put an empty array like so. Now, the extra optional key that we're going to make use out of this for this create slice method to accept other action types unrelated to its own state is extra reducers. So here we could explicitly give key value pairs just like the others reducers right here, except as a key we reference other action types from other reducers. So how do we, what is the action type, for example, of this create within the create to-do slice? So the way that we get that is, and remember, we never defined action type constants like are in our OG file, all these boilerplate nonsense here. So the way that we get the action type of our create to-do action type is we do this. We have our to-do slice that we created in this create slice method here. And it in turn has, if you see these autocomplete, has actions. And it now wants you to get that. It references all the actions that it has. The one that we are interested in is create. And if you do it like this, remember this object is a key value pair. If you put square brackets, that's saying that the variable of here will become your new key, right? So normally if this was a JavaScript application, you could just do it like this and it will reference that action type of the create to do action. However, because we're dealing with a TypeScript file and TypeScript doesn't like this, what we have to do is just do dot type, get the type of it. And now it's no longer complaining to us. So if it gets this, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna update our state. Like so. Just add it by 1, increment it. And not only that, we also gotta do it for all the other actions. Actions, edit, type, state, state +1, to do slice, actions, toggle type, state, state +1, and to do slice dot actions dot delete. Oh, we don't have to delete, it's called remove now because delete's a reserved keyword. State, state +1. And again, I'm returning the output of our state here because we're dealing with a primitive state. So we can't do like the quote unquote mutating the state. We got to return it here. And that's it for our reducers. Now we have to configure the store, right? So instead of, let's see how we did it in the OG method of doing it. We first got to combine the reducers, but we don't have to do this because, and you see how they use the create store from the Redux library. Redux Toolkit comes with its own special version of a create store that does a lot of these boilerplate for us automatically. So let's see how we do that. We first got to import from here. It's called configure store. It's Redux Toolkit's version of create store. So we can do export default configure store, and it takes an object as its argument. We gotta give it the reducers. Actually, I'm sorry, we do have to combine the reducers, but we're gonna get the combined reducers from the Redux Toolkit. So let's get combined reducers here, and let's combine the reducers. So I'm sorry about that, I was mistaken. We actually do have to combine the reducers. Let's call it reducers. Now just the reducer with the lowercase. Combine reducers. We will do. So this combined reducers is slightly different than the combined reducers that's used here. It's the Redux Toolkit's version of combined reducers. We have to give it all the reducers that our create slice generates for us. So how do we get those reducers? And the way that we get them is just this. First, we give the name, just like name that's going to be represented in our state, like what we did in the OG way of doing things. So let's first give to-dos. We're going to get it from our to-do slice. But to get the reducer part of our to-do slice, we do dot reducer. That's how we get the reducers. Now it's pretty much the same as here. And then we also have the selected to-do. That's selected to-do slice dot reducer. And counter is going to be counter slice dot reducer, like so. So now we give it to our store by doing reducer is reducer, but shorthand ES6 notation is just because they're the same name, we just put a comma like so. Hey guys, Justin from the feature again. I made a slight, not a mistake, but something that we could optimize our code even better. One thing that Redux Toolkit does for us is we don't actually have to call this combine reducer. So as long as we make our reducers an object, Redux Toolkit, and we give it to our configure store, by the way, as a reducer here. Redux, whoops, I used it wrong. There you go. Redux Toolkit will automatically call combine reducers upon this object that we give it. So this was make our code a little bit cleaner and nicer and less boilerplate. So we could go up here and remove the combine reducers. So guys, you could do it like this. And this is actually much cleaner than what I had before. All right, back to the video. And we don't need to give it the middleware because by default, it comes with Redux Dunk and it comes with the dev tools. So we don't have to have that. Granted, we also do want to use the logger in which this Redux Toolkit does not come with by default. We will add that in a bit, but let's just finish this and put this to use. So just to make sure that we did everything correctly. I just want this to work with our Redux Toolkit Redux way of setting it up. But now we have a bit of a problem. How is our app going to import the action creators? There is no export here anywhere where we are exporting the action creators that the slice functions automatically creates. So we have to manually export those. So let's do that here. Maybe below my counter slice. We will say export const. We're going to export a couple things as named exports. And we're going to get all of these from our to-dos actions. It's actually called to-dos slice.actions. If you see here, another property of this slice is the actions. So we're just going to get all the action creators and export them here. I will export, let's see, the create. What was it called? It's just called create, right? However, create's not a good name to export it because this is a named export. Create's not a good name, so I'm gonna rename this as create to do action creator, like so. And also we have, let me just make sure I know what names I use here so that I'm consistent. We have edit to do action creator, toggle to do action creator. We have remove, right? However, I'm gonna rename the remove to delete to do action creator so that I don't have to change anything with my app.index functional component. And I think those are our 4 action creators from our to slice. Now we have 1 action creator from our selected to do slice, and that is selected. Did I call it select? Let's rename this actually. Let's call this, actually select's good. Select's good. Select, let's rename that as select to do action creator, like so. So now we have successfully exported our action creators. And now I think we could finally go to our app.index. Oh, before we go here, actually, we gotta update our top level index file. Let's see if I could just find it. Here it is. So here we're using the store from the OG Redux from this file right here. And also we are using the provider from React Redux. So this provider, we still have to use it for the Redux toolkit, but instead of using the store from the redux.og, we will import store from Redux toolkit, like so. So this, what this is importing is, if we go back to our Redux toolkit, the very last line, we are exporting default the configure store, pretty much the same as our OG way of doing things. So now, if everything went to plan, our store is connected with our Redux toolkit. So let's go to our app.index. I'm going to comment out this import of our action creators, and just below it, I will import the same names, except this time from Redux toolkit. So create to do action creator, edit to do action creator, toggle to do action creator, delete, and select. So let's see if that worked. Let me refresh the page. And I'm getting an error because it says attempt to import error, toggle to do action creator is not exported from Redux toolkit. So for some reason, he doesn't think that this exists. Create to do action creator. But it does actually. Let me see. Yeah. So let me actually just open up my terminal. And I'm going to restart my server. Let me close out of this. npm start. Okay, that has finished. So yes, that was just a bug. And everything seems to be connected. Do you see this Redux DevTools is lit up? So everything seems to be working. Let me just bring this into view. And we have our initial 3 states here. Now let's try doing a couple things, right? So let's create a new one, test. It did create it. Now look at our action type name. It did todos.create. Before we had those crazy capitalized letters, but now our slice functions automatically generated this action for us called todos/create. But let's keep on working. How about we select a couple things? Now look at the action type name. It says selected to do/select. We could toggle them, to-dos toggle, you see it here. And all the while we do this, this number is getting updated. As you can see here, see that, 910. We could edit this, learn Redux, good. And this is now called to-dos edit. We could even delete these, and that gets registered here. So how did Redux Toolkit give it these names? The way that it did it is it goes to our create slice, it looks at the name, puts that as the first action type, puts a hyphen on, put a slash next to it, and the name that goes after the slash, as you can see here, is just a key that these reducers have: create, edit, toggle, remove. For the select to do, we had just select, right? But that's why we don't have to name our action creators like a very descriptive name. We didn't have to name this key create to do, this key edit to do, kind of like what we did in the old way of doing things, because it's redundant. This name property automatically allows us to know which action, which type it is associated with. So this is very good in my opinion. And I'm actually going to be doing this for my own personal applications too from now on. I think this is very useful. And it removes a lot of the boilerplate code. So, by the way, let's try to make it connected, look like this as much as possible. Remember, we have logger here. Right now, we don't have logger. Nothing's being logged here, right? So let's import logger and put it to use with our new Redux toolkit way of setting up the code. So let me import right below UUID, import logger from Redux logger. But whenever we use other middleware outside of the standard middleware that Redux Toolkit comes with, we have to import one more thing from the Redux Toolkit, and that's called get default middleware. So let me explain why this is important. So as I explained in the beginning, our Redux Toolkit automatically connects a couple important middlewares for us to use by default. But now, if it decides to manually add middleware to our store, we have to refeed it the default middleware. So let me explain what that means. If I were to just do this, middleware, by the way, this configure store is an object. It gets a middleware as an optional key. If I just wrote, let's see, like logger here, notice we're not using like apply middleware or anything. It automatically does that for us. The problem with just doing it this way, now it doesn't have access to the other handy middleware that this automatically comes with. If you want to add manually the automatic middleware that the Redux Toolkit comes with, you gotta use this get default middleware, call that, and then spread that within our middleware. That way we're telling the store, we're letting it know that, look, I still want to use the default middleware that Redux Toolkit comes with. But now if you didn't, for whatever reason, want to use that, then you would just put this line out and just put the middlewares that you want to use. In this case, you will no longer use the default middleware that it comes with. By the way, if you only want to use the default middleware, you just remove this line, and then by default, it will only give you the default middleware that this Redux Toolkit comes with. But because we want the logger, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to say const middleware is going to equal ... default middleware, get default middleware, comma logger, and just reference that within here using ES6 notation like so, making it a little bit neater. Now let's see if it's connected. I do some action and you see the logger taking place in my terminal. So that is working as intended. Okay, so now for whatever reason, whether you want to push your code into production, let's say you want to turn off the dev tools that's lit up here, right? How do you turn this off? Well, the way that you turn that off is, if I remember, which actually I don't. So let me just go to the Redux Toolkit website. And I'm gonna go to the API section. And what I want is the configure store. So this has an optional key called the DevTools, which accepts a Boolean. So we could say DevTools, by default, it is true. We could set it as false. If we do that, go back to our app, our thing is no longer, DevTools is no longer lit up, meaning it's not connected. So in case you want to turn off your DevTools for production use, you could also do something like this. If you had environment variables, I forgot what's the example that the configure store did. Let's see, yeah. So process.env, I always forget that. Your environment, if you had environment variables set up and you say if it's not equal to production, turn it on. Otherwise, if it's equal to production, then turn it off. So that's another handy way of turning on and off your DevTools. Okay, so let me just check this out and make sure everything is working. So now we have something that was identical to our Redux application that we had before using the OG way, but now we did it using Redux Toolkit. So let's compare the OG way and the new way. For one, we have, in my opinion, a lot less boilerplate. If you look at the Redux OG, the total line of code is 204. Total line of code in Redux Toolkit is 114. So that's a little bit over half of the Redux OG. So it cut down a lot of the boilerplate for us. Not only that, we could do things such as quote unquote mutate the state if it's an object or an array inside using Immer. Where is it? Yeah, all this stuff right here. It automatically generated for us the action creators. Also, another handy thing is it automatically connected us the dev tool so that we didn't need to do that. It automatically connected us the Redux Dunk, which we unfortunately didn't use in this example. It also connected us with a few other things that prevents us from making dumb mistakes. That is very common in that a lot of users by accident create. So this was an example of Redux Toolkit side-by-side comparison with the traditional way of setting up Redux. Let's go back to our notes. By the way, guys, real quick, if you guys want a copy of this finished version with all the dependencies installed and both the Redux Toolkit version of the Redux and also the original way, that if you wanted this code, go back to my GitHub, which is here. Go click on branches and you'll see this finished version branch here. If you just open this up, you will see the finished code here. So just clone this or fork this or whatever, and you could compare, or you could even just go in here directly, go to the source file, go to the, where's the Redux Toolkit, and you can see all my code here. So if you guys want to use this as a reference, here you go. Okay guys, now that we're done with that, I wanted us to do a quick recap of all the functions that's provided in Redux Toolkit. And the reason why I'm doing this is I want us to really solidify our understanding and knowledge of this toolkit. So the first function that we're going to be looking at is called the configure store and the get default middleware. So remember, this replaces create store from the Redux library. It's like a wrapper that does all the boilerplate for us. Let's look at all the properties that this receives, right? So this is the interface for the object. So remember, inside the configure store, we pass in an object, and this is the shape of the object that we're passing in. It has 4 optional keys, properties, and 1 requirement. So the first property that is required is, of course, the reducer. So the reducer, we could either pass in multiple reducers like what you see here, and this is actually what we did in our example, our to-do example. So it takes in an object, the keys becomes the name of the slice, and on the values we put in our reducer. So remember, I made a mistake on this. No combine reducer function needed. We don't need to call the combine reducers function to let Redux know that these are a bunch of reducers that we're combining. The Redux Toolkit automatically calls this combine reducer function for us, so no combine reducers function needed. Now, if for whatever reason your store composed of just one slice of state, then you could just pass in not an object as the value of the reducer, but just the reducer itself, a function, like so. So the next property that this configure store receives is an optional property that is middleware. So it receives an array of middleware, and again, it is optional. If no middleware key is provided, then it just applies the default middleware that Redux Toolkit comes with. So remember, from the very beginning, these were the Redux Dunk, that is the async middleware that handles your async action calls, and also it also applies the Redux immutable state invariant middleware. This is pretty much, it gives you an error whenever you try to mutate your state directly without using Immer. So that's another helper middleware that it comes with. So again, if you don't have this middleware key within your configure store, then it will just apply those two as default. Now, if for whatever reason you wanted to remove those 2 default middlewares, then you could just provide an empty array as a key, like so. Now, if you wanted to add the defaults and additional middlewares to your store, to your Redux store, then make an array. In my example, I just called it middleware. Spread the get default middleware. This will spread the default middlewares into the array, and also add the additional middlewares after that. And then connect that to your configure store, and that will add it to the store. So remember, if you're coming from Redux, this is important. You don't need to wrap your middleware with the apply middleware function that Redux comes with. So Redux Toolkit also comes with this apply middleware, but you don't need to use it. It will do that for you automatically. And the next key is the dev tools. Again, this is optional. It's turned on by default, and pretty much it lets your store know whether to turn on the Google Chrome extension, you know, the one that looks like this, whether you want that on or off. So it's on by default, and you don't need to install this separately. Redux Toolkit comes with it automatically. Now, let's say you either want to turn it off, then you just do DevTools, I think it was false, or you do a conditional. You could do a conditional statement like you see in this example. This is from the official documentation, by the way. Let's say you didn't want to turn it on if it's on production. So then you could do something like process.env, that node environment is not equal to production, then turn it on, otherwise turn it off. So this is a pretty handy way to conditionally turn on or off the Redux DevTools. The next one is the optional preload state. And this is the same thing as in Redux. Redux also has this, the original Redux, the create store function. So pretty much if you want to pre-populate your store with a couple of variables, with a couple data, then you can make, by the way, this is from the official documentation. You can make an object like this with to-dos and visibility filter and just pass them along to the configure store. And that way your Redux store will be, by default, be pre-populated with these data. And the last property we have for the configure store is the optional enhancers. So this will either receive an array of enhancers or a callback function. So I was on the Redux official Redux documentation website, and it tells us what an enhancer is. It says most apps extend the functionality of the Redux store by adding middleware or stored enhancers. Note, middleware is common, enhancers are less common. Middlewares add extra functionality to the Redux dispatch function, kind of like Redux Dunk, and enhancers add extra functionality to the Redux store. So here's an example from the Redux Toolkit documentation. They npm installed this thing called Redux batch, and they passed that on as a single element in an array to the enhancers. So this is how you use enhancers. And before we go on to the other functions, let's just talk about the get default middleware real quick. So we've been using this, it gives you the default middleware, but you could actually pass in an object and then to customize it. So here's an example of that. They are customizing the dunk and the serializable check. So one thing that I did forget to mention is this also comes with a serializable check middleware. You can read about that in the documentations. And this is pretty much all the objects, the options that we could pass into this. So if you're interested in this, then check out the official Redux Toolkit documentation to read all about this. So the next function that we're going to talk about is the famous create slice. So this is what it looks like. It takes an object with 4 keys, 3 being required and 1 being optional. So if I got the snippet from the documentation, it says that create slice is a function that accepts an initial state, an object full of reducer functions, and a slice name, and automatically generates action creators and action types that correspond to the reducers and state. So pretty much this, we give it the reducers that we want this slice of state to have. It will automatically then generate us the action creators and the action types that's associated with it. This is a very powerful function. Let's get on with the easy properties first. So the first one that I want us to focus on is the name. So the name is a string, and it pretty much names the slice of the state that you're working with. So if you look at the Redux dev tool snippet you see here, you see the various action types. I see 4 action types here: to do is create, selected to do select, and so on. So this is also a new way to name our action types, and I actually prefer this over the all uppercase manually coded in action types that we see in the traditional Redux application. But pretty much all the words that you see to the left of the /, those are the name of your slice. So to-dos and selected to-dos that you see in this example. So that's what the name is for. The next one is the initial state. Now, initially, the initial state may not look like much, and it gives you the initial state of the reducer. So the state that this slice is dealing with, what is its initial state going to be? So in a traditional Redux application, here is a reducer function for a traditional Redux application. You see the state is equal to 0 in the parameter. So that is the default state of this state. And we always had to write that equal sign. But it's very easy to forget because our IDE usually won't tell us if we forget that. However, in Redux Toolkit, notice if I commented out the initial state, then it gives me a whole error. And it will tell me, look, you need the initial state. So that's why this is very useful and very convenient for us to have. It will prevent a lot of the mistakes that we could possibly make by forgetting the state or initial state within our reducers. So I think this is very good. The next property that I want us to talk about is the reducers property. And this is very different from the old way of writing our reducers. So pretty much we're giving the create slice the list of reducers that it needs. Let's compare the old way of writing our reducers and the new Redux Toolkit, the RTK way of writing our reducers. So let's look at the old way first. And here we have the counter reducer example again. So notice first, we must provide an initial state. Do you see the state equal to 0 in the parameters? That's very easy to forget about, but we must have that. Otherwise, we will run into errors. Number 2, we must always provide a default case to our old reducers. So that's just a default return state. And pretty much that's required because our reducer may be fed an action type that it doesn't care about. In that case, we don't want to mutate the state at all. We don't want to update the state in any way. We just return the state as it is. And number 3, we must use string literals or constants to define our action types. So you see the case increment, case decrement. And to be honest, that's not even that bad, but in a real application, the action types probably won't be that simple. And the tradition is to define a string variable constants for our action types. So here's an example of that. And usually within our action types, we have the verb of what it's doing, such as add, update, delete, and all that stuff. And also the name of the slice of our store. So in this example, I have defined the action type, add order product components, and then I set that equal to, again, pretty much the same word. So this is very verbose, and it's a lot of code writing. So imagine you have like a bunch of like hundreds of action types, which is very possible and very reasonable. You'll be writing a bunch of constants like this. And number 4, the only way to properly update the state of our store is to use the immutable update pattern. What that means is we cannot mutate our state directly. We can't do like state.push upon our state. We can't manipulate a property of the state. We can't call splice on an array if our state was an array. We must always return a new version of that state without mutating the original state. So that has potential to get very difficult to do, and it makes our code a little bit messy. So it may be very hard to read later down the road, especially if you have a bunch of reducers. Now, let's compare that to the new way of writing our reducer. So first of all, notice that it's an object that we are passing into the reducer's property, and we're passing a bunch of key value pairs. So we have 3 reducers here that we're passing. Now, one of them, the multiply one in particular, looks a little bit different, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you notice this, it looks a lot cleaner, and we don't have an initial state defined in this reducer's property, but that's because within our create slice function, we have defined the initial state elsewhere. And if we forget to write that, our IDE will complain. So that's another good thing. It prevents us from making mistakes. And not only that, because we don't have a typical switch and a case statement within our reducer, it's just a key value pairs, we don't need to provide it a default case. Redux Toolkit will automatically take care of that for us. So if this reducer gets an action type that he doesn't care about, it just doesn't mutate the state at all. So that's another good thing, and that's another potential place that we don't need to make a mistake on. Number 2, we can optionally prepare our actions. So remember, one thing that the create slice does is it automatically gives us the action types and the action creators. Now, the action creator that it automatically gives us may not be sufficient to adequately prepare the action that our action creator creates. So in that case, we could prepare the action type. As you can see from the above example, the multiply reducer is an object instead of a function, where it has a reducer key and also the prepare key. So the prepare key, it first goes through the prepare key. It prepares the action, as you can see here. It says payload is either going to be value or 2. And once it prepares the action, it feeds it to the reducer key. And that's like a typical reducer. And from our code along example a couple minutes ago, here is an example of that. What we did here is we are preparing our action because we're creating a new to-do, I believe. And we had to give it a new unique ID. We made that unique ID by calling the UUID library function that generates a random ID for us. So this is another way that we could prepare our action. And we are doing this because we didn't make our action creators ourselves. And number three, we could use, this uses Immer to allow us to write quote unquote mutable state logic. What that means is we could use methods like push or splice or manipulate a property of an object directly. And what Immer will do is it will detect that we have mutated the state, and it will replace that code with an immutable state logic. So we could safely update it without worrying about. And what this will do for us is, one, it will be a lot easier for us to write our code, and two, it will make our reducers much more legible, I think. So this is another good thing. And I want us to focus on this. I want us to do some comparison between immutable state logic and Immer's mutable state logic. And I also want us to discuss the potential pitfalls that this has, and some things that we have to watch out for. Okay, so let's compare the way that we write immutable traditional state update logic and also the Redux Toolkit way using Immer. So let's start out with arrays. And the first operation that I want us to cover is add. So adding an element to an array. So with the typical traditional immutable way, we would return a new array spreading the previous state and adding the payload. So I'm going to assume that the payload contains a new element that we want to add to the array. So this is not too bad, but it's still not as legible as I wanted to. So it's much better in the Redux Toolkit way. All we gotta do is just call state.push payload. Number two, I want us to look at how to update a particular element in an array. So the immutable way is this crazy thing right here. We have to invoke the map function. By the way, this is one way. There might be other ways to do it, but this is just what I usually do. We have to invoke the map function. We have to iterate over every single element within our state array. And if it matches for example, the ID within our payload, if we have finally found the element that we're looking for, then we update that with maybe our payload.data, right? That's the data new element that we're updating with. Otherwise, keep the old element. So we got to do this map function to update an array. Now, the Redux Toolkit way using Immer, all we just got to do is find the index and then just set that index equal to payload.data. This is a bit misleading because you got to first find the index first, but that's not even that hard either. And I think this is much more legible. Now, to remove an element in an array, what you do in the immutable way is kind of similar to updating. Instead, you use the filter method on the state. You loop through each element in your array and you filter out all the ones that does not equal to your filter in, all the ones that does not equal to your unique ID or whatever you're looking for. Now, in the Redux Toolkit way, you could call the splice method. So splice method, what it does is you first give it an index, which I called I here. And then the second parameter, you tell it how much element starting from that index you want to remove. So we just want to remove one. So we just say state.splice I, 1. And this will remove it in place. So you'll remove our state. So this is the way that you remove an element using Immer in Redux Toolkit. Okay, now let's compare it for objects. So first of all, if you want to add a key value pair into an object in an immutable way, what you just do is you spread the state, spreading all the previous keys and value pairs of the object. And let's say the new key that we want to add is called new. Then you do like new, and maybe the value you want that to be associated with is a payload. So this is what you would do. Now the Redux Toolkit way using Immer, all you just gotta do is state.new is the payload. Very simple and very easy to read. Number two, let's say you want to update a key value pair. Let's say you have a key called edit, right? And you want to update that with your new payload. So in an immutable way, it looks very similar. All you gotta do is spread the state and then edit is payload. So why this works is that because the edit key edit and then the payload that comes after the spread operator of state, it will overwrite the old edit key that you had. So this is why this works. But in the Redux Toolkit way, again, it looks very similar to the first way of adding. You just do state.edit equals payload, and that will overwrite the existing data that was inside the edit key. Now, to remove a key value pair in an immutable state, it's fairly complicated and long-winded in an immutable way. So you could either write all this crazy logic. Let's say you do object.entries of your state, and then filter out the one that's the key that you're looking for. So that's one way. I don't want to write that here. Or you could just use external library such as Lodash and use the omit function that it comes with, or like the long way that I just described. But using the Redux toolkit, what you could just do is use the delete operator. So all you gotta say is delete state dot and the key that you want to delete. So state dot to delete. So this makes it very simple. Okay, so let's talk about the potential pitfalls of using Immer that Redux toolkit comes with. So first of all, the mutating the state directly only works because of Immer. So, and how Immer works again is that you're not actually mutating the state because of Immer. What it does is whenever it detects that you are mutating the state directly, it changes that so that it changes it to an immutable update state logic. But please keep in mind that it is Immer that's doing this. And the reason why I say this is because say you were working with Redux toolkit and that was the only thing that you work with. So you had this idea that you could just mutate the state directly. Now, if you were to join a project that didn't use Redux toolkit and specifically didn't use Immer, then you will be confused why it doesn't work anymore. So always keep in mind that it only works because of Immer. Number two, and this is important, this is also from the documentation, that's why I put it in quotes. Most importantly, you need to ensure that you either mutate the state argument or return a new state, but not both. So one thing about Immer, if you saw from our examples, is when you're using Immer to quote unquote mutate the state, you're not returning anything in that reducer. You're just mutating it directly and just leaving it be. There is no return in that function. Here's an example of what not to do. So we have a toggle to do reducer here. Look at the first, the middle line. It says to-do.completed is equal to not to-do.completed. So here we have mutated the state directly using Immer. Now, if that was the end of this function, that will be okay. That will be good. But look what they do afterwards. They are returning a new state with the to-do update as well. This is not allowed. You gotta choose one or the other. Either choose to use the immutable state update pattern or using the Immer's update pattern, just mutate the state directly, but don't use both. So if you're using Immer, you should not have a return in your reducer. And number three, don't try to apply the mutate logic to a state that is a primitive value. So Immer works for objects and arrays, but not for primitive values. So let's say you got used to not having any returns in your reducer functions and just mutating the state directly. But look at this example right here. Check out the initial state, it's 0, meaning it's a primitive value because numbers are primitives. And within our increment, we're not returning anything. All we're doing is state plus plus. So we're thinking that it will update the state because we're quote unquote mutating the state, but that won't work. None of these reducers will work because our state is a primitive value and not an object or an array. So don't try to do the mutate logic that is a primitive value. If your state, like this example, is a primitive value, say a Boolean or a number or a string or so on, you gotta use the traditional immutable state logic where you return the new value. So the increment should be return state plus 1, the decrement should be return state minus 1, and increment by amount should be return state plus action.payload. So these were the potential pitfalls of using Immer. So please be careful of these 3 points. Okay, so let's go back to our create slice function. We took a pretty big detour about the reducers that it receives. So we took care of the name, the initial state, and the reducers. Now the last optional key, the optional property that this create slice function takes is the extra reducers. So if you remember, we actually did use this in our demo example, and here it is right here. So how create slice works is it takes a slice out of your state, right? So you may have different parts of your store sliced up in different ways. So in our example, we had the to-dos. We had the select to-do, which was like, it tells you which to-do that it was selected. We also had this random counter, but this counter didn't get updated by any of the action types that action creators that it created, but rather it used the actions from other slices of the store. So whenever you need to update your own state based upon other action types, action creators, or actions from another slice, then you need to use these extra reducers, because the reducers will only take, the reducers key will only take action types that's associated with its own slice of state. So in this counter slice example that I've written here, notice it doesn't have any of its reducers of its own. That's why it's an empty object. Now it receives the extra reducers, and the reducers that it receives from is from the to-do slice. So one of the output of this create slice, if you remember, is we have access to all the action types, and that's what I am referencing in the keys of these inside the extra reducers. Okay, finally, let's talk about the output of the create slice function. So here in this example, we have made a simple counter create slice, and I have put that into a variable called counter. Now, what does this counter variable come with? So one thing it comes with is we could do counter.name, and that will just give us the string counter. It's pretty much the name of our slice. And then we could also do counter.actions, and this will be an object of our action creators. So in our example here, we only have two reducers, right? Increment and decrement. So it automatically creates for us the action creators associated with increment and the action creator associated with decrement. So here's an example of using the increment action creator, and our increment and our decrement doesn't have any extra payload or parameters that it receives, so that's why it's a function without any arguments. But this is one of the things that makes create slice so powerful and so efficient for us to code, is it automatically creates us these action creators. And finally, another property that this counter variable comes with is the reducer. And this reducer, this we pass it to our combined reducers, or we pass it to our store. So in this example, this is from the to-do app that we made a couple minutes ago, maybe even an hour ago now, by the time you're watching this. But within the counter, you see the counter slice.reducer. We are passing the reducers to these combined reducers. And again, keep this in mind. We don't need to use combined reducers in Redux Toolkit. That was just a mistake on my end. So this was an overview of create slice. Now let's briefly go over the other not so important functions that this Redux Toolkit comes with. Okay, so let's go over the create action function that this Redux Toolkit comes with. So again, keep in mind that we don't need to use this function unless we had to make some special custom edge case create action, right? Because the create slice function that we just went over, that has pretty much the create action and the create reducer function, which we'll see in a little bit. It has both of them combined into one. So for the most part, we could use create slice, but in case you wanted some more fine-tuned customization or whatnot, let's take a look briefly at the create action. So this is from the docs. On the top right, you see the type, the first parameter, which is required, is pretty much the name of the action type, the constant. And secondly, you could optionally give a prepare action, which is a callback function. This is kind of similar to the prepare key that we saw within our create slice. It kind of prepares our action for us. Otherwise, it automatically creates the action for us. So here's an example. This is the old way of doing things. So first, we have to define an action type. We see the const increment is equal to counter/increment. And then we have the action creator. So remember, in the old Redux way of doing things, we defined our action creators using native JavaScript. There wasn't any special functions to create our action creators. It was just a regular JavaScript function. So it's a function that optionally takes a payload, and we return this action, which is an object that always has a type, and which is a string, And optionally, it can also have a payload, which in this case, we're just passing along the amount, right? So when you call this action, if you look in the example below, it says, once you call it increment 3, then it gives you back an object called an action. Type counter is counter/increment and a payload of 3. So using the create action function that Redux Toolkit comes with, you could just define an action creator called const increment is equal to the create action. And in this example, we're not giving it a prepare action. We're just saying, hey, look, I want to create an action that's called counter/increment. Then whenever you call upon the action, you just get a payload, you get an action back with the type. Now you could also give it a parameter, as you can see the third line with increment 3, then that parameter that you have given it automatically goes to the payload key. So it automatically gives you the payload key. So notice nowhere here did we manually define the type, returning the action object with the type key and the payload key. It automatically assigns you the payload key. So for the most part, this won't be a problem, but maybe for whatever reason, you didn't like to use the payload key. Maybe you wanted to name it something else. So in that case, you're kind of stuck with it. You're kind of stuck with the payload key, but I don't think that's an issue for most people. Now, they overloaded the toString method such that if you call the action.toString, you get back the action type. So this can be beneficial when you're using Typescript, for example. Let's look at also the create action with the optional prepare action callback function. So here it is right here. So here we are calling the action to do /add, and we have given the optional callback function, which he is calling prepare. It gets a text as an argument and returns back the action with the text, a ID, a unique ID with the UUID, kind of like what we did in our demo, and a created that, which uses the new date. So if you wanted to, if the automatic action that it automatically generates for you is not sufficient for you, then just like create slice, you could prepare your actions like such. So this was create actions. Now let's look at the other part of this, which is the create reducer. Actually, before we go on to create reducer, let's look at this, the return of this one more time. So we are returning an object from this optional callback function as a second argument. We're returning an object with one key in this example, right? We have the key that is payload, and which itself is also an object, the action to be more specific, the payload of the action to be more specific. Notice we don't have the type key, which is typically needed in an action. And the reason for that is here we are just preparing the payload. Now, this object that we are returning this function could also optionally have the meta key, which you could put any meta information there, and also an error key. In case there's an error, you could put any error data inside that key as well. So that was create action. Okay, now let's look at create action's counterpart, the create reducer function. So remember, this is the old way, by the way. Remember in the traditional Redux application, to make your reducers, just like your action creators, it's a regular JavaScript function that takes in two parameters. The first parameter is a state, and you must always pass it a default value, as you can see here, equals 0, and you also have the action. Now, typically within a reducer, you have the switch and a case statement where each of your cases is all the different action types that this slice of state is interested in. And after you have made all your reducers like that, you need the default case where you just return the state itself. So this was the old way. Now, using the create reducer method, you could just make that as simple like this. So the create reducer function takes in two parameters. The first one is the default value. And notice this, because it's your first parameter, you're never gonna forget about this, right? You can forget about the default value in the original way of doing things, but here you can't forget about it. So that way it prevents you from making simple mistakes. And the second parameter is an object with key value pairs of all your action type names as a key, and a function that will be your reducer as a value. And notice we don't have a default case here. Another good thing about using this create reducer function is just like our create slice, we could use Immer's. Immer is included with this so that you could quote unquote mutate the state directly as long as it's an object. and Immer will work its magic and make it into an immutable state update function method. So here is an create action and create reducer working side to side. So we have defined two action creators, increment and decrement. Now remember, increment and decrement, that also automatically creates us the action types associated with it. So when we define our reducer right below, we are using, you could either get the key, the action type name, by just calling the increment, calling the result of the create action, like in the first example with the increment. This will only work in JavaScript, however. If you're using TypeScript, TypeScript will complain to you. So if you're using TypeScript, all you gotta do is just do the action creator dot type, and that will give you the correct action type for you. So this was the create reducer. Again, for the most part, you don't need to use the create action and the create reducer, because create slice will do all of that for you automatically. So I'm back on the Redux Toolkit documentation website, the API section, and we covered most of the important functions. Now we have this create selector. I mean, this is also important too, but this is a memoizing selector function from the reselect library. I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is from another library, which is equally important, and I use this all the time on my work and personal projects. And I will definitely make a separate video on this, so please stay tuned for that. And we also have these other exports too. So we have this create, this is actually an internal export that they say, but create serializable state invariant middleware. Pretty much you could customize your state invariant middleware here. And also, let's see, we have the create next state, which is part of Immer, combined reducers, which we don't need to use. Compose is from the original Redux 2. We don't need to use this. Pretty much none of these we don't really need to use, but it comes with this library just in case you need to use them for. All right, so now let's go to the Q&A. So probably the most common question, the most frequent question is how we handle async logic using Redux Toolkit. So keep in mind that Redux Toolkit comes with Redux Dunk by default and is connected into our store as default. So we don't need to configure our store to use Redux Dunk. And by the way, the example that I will show you guys right now, I will be using the Redux Dunk way. That is the default way, the recommended way from the Redux team to handle our async logic. Now there are other libraries such as Redux Saga and so on, and you can use them as long as you install them and connect those middlewares to your store, even using Redux Toolkit. But I'll just show you guys how to handle it using the Redux Dunk way. So with Redux Saga, it will be pretty similar, but obviously you gotta set it up the Redux Saga way, but let's get on with the Redux Dunk way. So first of all, within your slice of your state, let's say you said create slice, right? Add an error key for the case when your async call is rejected. So here's an example of that. Let's say we are making a GET request to some repo, and we want to collect how many open issues there are. By the way, this is all from the advanced section of the tutorials of the official Redux Toolkit website. So you could just follow along there too if you want. But this is what our state looks like. We have the open issues count. This is a number that we are fetching from the external API. And we are following the directions where we have added an error key that will either be null if there is no error, otherwise it will be a string with the error message. And we have also initialized our state with open issue count -1 and error null. So after you have done that, create reducers for both the success state of the async call and also the rejected state. So an async call could either be a success, meaning we have fetched the data correctly, we have successfully fetched the data, or it could be rejected. Maybe we got a 404 or 500 or whatever, right? Then we have a rejected situation. So we gotta manually create reducers for both situations. So here is an example. Notice that we're using create slice. We have given it a name, the initial state that we have defined above. And also we are putting two reducers. The first one is of the action type get repo details success. And the next one is get repo details failed. So notice within our success reducer, we are doing state.openIssueCount. We're updating that based upon the number of open issues that we have fetched from the API. And we are setting the error to null because there was no error. But now within our get repo details failed reducer, we are setting the open issue count to -1 because that's a default, like no open count. We didn't get any data from the API. And we are also setting the error with the action payload. So the action payload in this situation will have the error message. So after we have defined these reducers manually, then separately on a different line of code or on a different file or whatever, create your dunk function, your async dunk function that either dispatches the success action or the failed action. So let me give you the example here. By the way, before we do that, let's extract out the action creators that our create slice has automatically created for us. We could get it from the .actions property. And here we are extracting the get repo details success, get repo details failed that we have defined earlier. And then we're going to put them to use here upon this async dunk function. So notice we're getting two parameters, org and repo. And also, if you're using Typescript, you could use the app dunk that this Redux toolkit comes with. You could just import that from the library. And you make your typical dunk async function that returns a function, right? That returns an async function, I mean. And we have your typical try and a catch inside. And then we await. We make the API call with the get repo details. And then if there was no error, we dispatch the get repo detail success that we have made, right? With the response that we got from the API. Otherwise, if we fall into the catch, because we had an error, we just dispatch the error. So this is how you currently handle async functions in Redux Toolkit using Redux Dunk. So you might be thinking this might have a lot of boilerplate because we have to add reducers for the success situation and also the fail situation and make a separate function. Pretty soon, however, this will not be the only way to make one. So in Redux Toolkit version 1.3, which as of the current time of when I'm making this video, it hasn't been released yet, but the maintainer of Redux said it will be coming out very soon. And actually the stable version is already done, as a matter of fact. But this 1.3 version will contain an additional function called the create async dunk. So let's take a look. Let's have a sneak preview about what that will be like very briefly. So this is again from the official documentation website. And here is them using the create async dunk function. So they have first imported it from the Redux toolkit, and they are making a separate function. It take the create async dunk takes the action type as a first parameter, which is a string, and the second parameter that it takes is the async function, the dunk function, and after that, so let me just move it over here real quick so that we have some more room, and it will automatically generate the three action types for us, and those are the pending and the action type. The way that looks like, the automatically generated action type, it just has a /pending. It has a fulfilled for when our promise is fulfilled, and also the rejected for when our promise was rejected. And then what we do with these is we add them to our reducers like here, and all you gotta do, instead of manually making your reducer name, all you gotta do is reference the create async dunk result, the function that you stored in a variable, and you just do .fulfilled for the fulfilled state, and you can also do .rejected for the rejected state, and so on. And once 1.3 comes out officially, I plan on making a tutorial on how to use this, how to make async call requests using Redux Toolkit, so please stay tuned for that as well. The next question is, how big is the package, the Redux Toolkit package compared to Redux? So let's do a little bit of a comparison. This is from npmjs.org. I think that's the website, npm website. And so here is Redux. Its unpacked size is 163 kilobytes. Now here is Redux Toolkit. It's 708 kilobytes. So it's pretty significantly bigger. Granted, it does come with some additional packages, but the majority of this size is because of Immer. So Immer is around like 500 kilobytes, I believe. So most of this package is from Immer. Now, the Redux team is hard at work trying to improve this. So here is a post from Mark Erickson, again, one of the maintainers of Redux, from the 1.3.0 alpha 1.10 build. So pretty much what this is saying is they are refactoring the code to better support tree shaking in Immer, and this will reduce the size of the package later. So maybe right now it might be a problem to you, maybe if you want your packages small, but it will improve with time. So let's just give it time and I'm sure that it will get smaller. Okay, and here's the final question. Didn't use context and use reducer hook kill off Redux? So why should we care about this Redux toolkit? And the answer to this question is no, it did not. Redux is here to stay. I would, especially if you're working on an extremely large application with a lot of state management, I would not use context and use reducer to handle that. Maybe for a smaller application, I would do something else, but I would stick with Redux. And as a matter of fact, I guarantee you, most companies will still continue using Redux as the #1 state management system. So it is here to stay, and that is why you should learn about Redux Toolkit. Okay, so before we end the video, let's summarize what we have just learned. And by the way, if you're still watching this video after all these hours, I really thank you. Kudos to you. I thank you so much for still sticking with this video. It was fairly difficult for me to make all this, especially because I do have a full-time job, but it was a pure pleasure for me to make this. And not only that, I learned a lot on making this video. So I encountered Redux Toolkit about a week ago or maybe 2 weeks ago, and just the past week I've been just devouring myself any free time I had on the Redux Toolkit. So hopefully you learned a lot with me. But anyways, let's summarize. Redux Toolkit will reduce a lot of boilerplate in your code. So with the old traditional way of building up your application, you had a lot of boilerplate, especially if you had a TypeScript application, but Redux Toolkit will reduce a lot of that boilerplate for you. Not only that, it's built with TypeScript, so using Redux Toolkit with TypeScript is truly a breeze. It makes the typing a lot easier, and you don't have to type a lot of redundant code using TypeScript. So this is a really big thing for me because I use TypeScript on a daily basis, and I had lots of duplicated boilerplate code in my code base. So using Redux Toolkit will reduce a lot of that. It comes batteries included. So a lot of the packages that it already comes with that you're probably going to be using, such as the Redux Dev Tools, Redux Dunk, and all that stuff, it already comes included with it. So not only that, it comes with a lot of other packages that helps you prevent from making mistakes. Not only just packages such as Immer or anything like that, but the way that you set up your actions and your reducers, or just using the create slice, which is the recommended way. It's the way that you write it, it prevents you from making mistakes such as forgetting about default, because you don't have to write the default case in this using the functions in the Redux Toolkit, and also the initial state. It forces you to define an initial state. So there's a lot of ways that it helps you prevent these common mistakes. And it has Immer to allow you to mutate, quote unquote, mutate the state directly, making it easier to update the state. And it also, this is the more important thing, I think, in my opinion, it makes your code a lot more legible. So again, what Immer does is you write mutating state logic and it will convert that code into an immutable state logic for you. And finally, it's the official way to set up a Redux application. So what that means is it'll probably get more popular over time. And this will probably be the de facto way of setting up a Redux application. And so it's here to stay, so it's definitely worth learning. Okay, so that was a summary of Redux Toolkit and the whole video, a comprehensive guide on Redux Toolkit. Guys, if you're still watching this right now, I thank you guys so much for still sticking with me. Again, I said it before, but I really hope that you guys learned a lot from this, and I hope that you guys will start using this and see for yourself just how useful this will become. Now, if you guys like this content, please click like and subscribe to my channel. I plan on making a lot more videos on Redux coming soon, such as the reselect function, use connect, the difference between using hooks with the React Redux application. And when 1.3 comes out, I plan on making a video on that. Redux Toolkit 1.3, by the way. So guys, if you guys like my content, please subscribe. And it's not just Redux stuff that I make. I also make a lot of anything related to coding, especially React and JavaScript. You will see it in my channel. So guys, again, and let me know in the comment section what you'll be using that you have learned from here, and what subject, what topic you like the most. And if you have any questions, then please let me know in the questions below, and I'll do my very best to try to answer them. Anyways, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you guys next time. Happy coding.